The honkening is upon us. The Freedom Convoy has reached Ottawa. Justin Trudeau has fled the city to an undisclosed location, and now vehicles across the city are slamming their horns, honking like crazy in protest of the vaccine mandates. And of course, the people who live there, not all of them, but many of them are taking to online forums outraged, saying, why won't these people stop? And the mainstream media in the United States and Canada are smearing the freedom truckers. That's right. When the workers of the world unite, the left gets mad, apparently. But we've got some mainstream articles that are calling them white supremacists who are flinging feces and stealing from the homeless. Wow, they are really, really and desperately trying to shut down and lie about what these truckers are doing. But with Ottawa and the honkening comes the U.S., with many U.S. truckers and people just across the country preparing to engage in their own honkening in their hometown. So we got a lot to talk about there. We've got Hunter Biden's business associate apparently cooperating on a tax investigation. Maybe something will happen, but I'm not going to hold my breath. And then I got to bring it up. Whoopi Goldberg said on The View that the Holocaust was not about race. And everybody stared at her, dumbfounded and confused, as she repeatedly doubled down and said, it's just white people doing it to each other. So we're going to have to talk about that one because that is a doozy. Joining us is an individual who has been disparagingly mentioned in leaked emails from the Clintons, Peter Schweizer.
That's a great intro. Thanks.
I told you I was going to say it.
That's great.
Why were they disparaging you in emails?
I wrote this book called Clinton Cash that exposed kind of their business model. I mean, they went from being completely broke when Bill Clinton left the White House to 10 years later, they were worth like $250 million. Hillary was in the Senate. She was Secretary of State. And they didn't like the way that I exposed that. So, they had some not such nice things to say about me. I don't think Chelsea always ever disparaged me. I never heard Chelsea, but Bill and Hillary were not happy.
But now you got a book about Biden and Xi Jinping, China?
Yeah, it's a book about all these Americans from the president, Congress, Republicans, and Democrats. We've got people in Silicon Valley, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and then you look at Wall Street, the big Wall Street banks, all doing deals in China and all apologizing for China and all, frankly, helping China in their competition with the United States. So, I name names and expose them.
Well, we will get into all of that, too, so thanks for joining us.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks.
We've also got Shimcast.
Seamus Coughlin here. Thank you for joining us on Timcast IRL. I am also, besides being a podcast host, the creator of Freedom Tunes. So if you want to go over to Freedom Tunes, check that out. Subscribe. We do a political cartoon every single week, sometimes twice a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I want to say I'm very excited for the show because the pre-show discussion was really fantastic.
It was
fascinating.
lit.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about the interactions with China, I think about Vladimir Lenin's. I think his quote was, "The capitalists will sell us the rope that we will use to hang them," or something.
That's
like
exactly
that.
it.
We'll sell you the rope you'll use to hang yourself. Is that it?
Hang yourself.
Yeah.
So like buying, Chinese goods, it kind of makes me think of that metaphor these days. Not that we're necessarily at war, but it's a conversation to have.
Yeah.
And I am also here pushing buttons in the corner. I'm very excited for this conversation because, like Ian was saying, they're definitely selling us a rope we're going to hang ourselves with. And I'm afraid we already have. So let's see what's going on with that.
I kind of feel like we should get one of those buttons you can buy where you can record a sound effect. And we should just have like a honk button, like honk, 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 honk. Because
all the way through the show.
Because it's a honk. Just like honk when we approve. Like Seamus says something good, we honk.
You would never honk it.
Everybody, those of you that are listening, one like equals one honk.
Yes.
So smash the honk button. Head over to timcast.com, become a member to help support this show and all of our work. Each new member is also one honk. So when you sign up, you are also expressing your distaste for Trudeau, for the vaccine mandates, because you're helping our journalists write news, do their jobs. You're helping us do this show, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments from this show. They go up Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. We call them the uncensored, not so family-friendly version of the show. You'll want to check it out. I'll just leave it there because it's not family friendly, and this version is. But again, go to timcast.com and don't forget to smash the like button right now. Subscribe to this YouTube channel you are currently on, and share the show anywhere you can because that really does help. Copying that URL, pasting it to Facebook, Twitter, Gab, Getter, whatever it is you use, seriously helps. We don't have a marketing budget. We just have grassroots support, and it is greatly appreciated. But let's get into that first story. Justin Trudeau says we are not intimidated. Oh. Trudeau won't meet convoy that continues to gridlock Ottawa. Before I read this, I want to give a trigger warning to all of the people who despise the mainstream media, because this one my friends. This one is a doozy. And I'm not literally giving you a trigger warning. I'm just building suspense because check this out. They write for the Toronto Sun. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he will neither meet with nor be intimidated by the convoy of Canadians he says spent the last few days harassing local businesses, waving Nazi flags, and stealing food from the homeless.
What?
Wow.
What is he talking
in
about?
all of the smears I have seen of protests in my day, that is impressive. And I was at Occupy Wall Street, and boy, did the media go after them.
Yeah.
But this is a bunch of truckers.
Yeah.
This is the lifeblood of any nation, delivering goods, angry with vaccine mandates and protesting it. And that is the characterization used in the media. Bravo. I'm impressed.
Also, can I ask a question? These truckers are stealing food from the homeless. What about the people who decided that we needed to print trillions and trillions of dollars and then inflated our currency so that lower income people have less of an ability to buy food? Are they stealing food from the homeless?
They're stealing from all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, what about those people who on top of that decided we need to impose a vaccine mandate on the truckers who literally bring us our food?
Oh, yeah. I saw a good post, and it said, it was like a lefty thing. And it said, stop saying labor shortage and start saying living wage shortage. And I responded, stop saying living wage shortage and say inflation.
Right.
Ooh.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that strikes me about this, it's classic attack the messenger, right? So they're going after the truckers. They're making these ridiculous claims about the truckers because they don't want to deal with the substance of the issue. And the other thing I don't understand is he says he's not going to be intimidated, but didn't Justin Trudeau like retreat or leave?
He's hiding.
Yeah,
He's
hiding.
literally hiding
I mean,
from
I
them.
think he is intimidated
Yeah.
by the truckers, isn't he?
He's like, I'm not scared of you guys. I'm not scared at all.
Right.
He's like turning
And
around.
no, he's like, I will not be intimidated. Breaking news, Justin Trudeau has fled Ottawa to an undisclosed location.
Exactly.
So let me read. This is amazing. Speaking to Canadians from isolation after testing positive for COVID. Oh, that's the reason he
timing.
fled, right?
COVID. He's got COVID.
He said, freedom of expression, assembly, and association are cornerstones of democracy. But Nazi symbolism, racist imagery, and desecration of war memorials are not. It is an insult to memory and truth. Hate can never be the answer. Now, I'm going to tell you this. When BLM came to Ottawa, he came out and he took a knee with all of them.
Yep.
Right.
He marched with them. He protested with them. And I'll also say, I certainly think anybody involved in that protest should completely agree. Yeah, Nazi symbols, racism, and all that stuff,
Absolutely.
not acceptable. We agree. Thanks, Justin. Are you still scared? Are you still
Right.
going to run away? Or are you going to come and meet with the people on the substance? Yeah, the answer is no.
Well, like during the BLM protest, did he mention that burning down people's businesses and destroying their ability to make a living is horrible and bad, and that he can't side with the protest on that basis? Of course not. And then when we're looking at this, he's saying having Nazi flags and desecrating memorials are not something that I'm willing to contend with. Okay, then how about we have a conversation about what they're actually doing, okay?
Right.
Because if any of them are even doing that, it's a tiny, tiny fringe minority. So why doesn't he talk about the fact that they're working class people banding together to protect their rights as workers?
You know, this is really interesting because when I was reading about this protest, it sounds so much like Occupy Wall Street. It sounds like how they went after Occupy. And then my response was, hey, you know, the radical left did co-opt Occupy Wall Street and turn it into something else. It was a populist uprising. There were libertarians, there were conservatives, there were left, there were liberals, and they were upset over the banker bailouts. Within a couple of weeks, though, the radical left completely co-opted the message and the money and booted out anyone who opposed them. So, you know, people who are at this trucker protest should make sure no ideologue should be able to take that message.
Yeah. Here's the thing I don't get, though. I mean, it used to be, you look back in the 60s, you know, Reagan was governor of California, the anti-war protesters, he didn't agree with them, but he'd meet with them. There used to be this tradition, you know, if you're a political leader and somebody's protesting and you don't agree with them, you try to at least meet. I mean, Justin Trudeau's not even prepared to meet with these guys. That's what's so shocking to me. I mean, they've got thousands of people doing this. You've got support for it. And Justin Trudeau is like, no, I'm going to pretend like you don't even exist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, whenever working class people try to band together to have their voice heard, it's insinuated that there's something wrong with them as a group of people for reasons that have nothing to do with the actual cause they're arguing for. So Tim mentioned Occupy Wall Street and how that was less partisan when it began. Interestingly enough, the Tea Party, which was generally to the right, was actually started on MSNBC. It was a left-wing pundit who said, we need a modern-day Tea Party because it is taxation without representation to spend money that future generations will have to pay off.
Right.
But then, of course, the Tea Party was instantly maligned as a racist movement.
Right.
And there were politicians who claimed, I can't remember who, maybe you guys do, but that they called them the N-word and other racial slurs.
Oh, yeah.
And all of the footage from the event showed that that did
Right.
not happen.
Right. Right. That's the go-to thing now, unfortunately. And look, I think we all agree that there are racists out there and they say racist things and do racist things. But every single time now there's an event or a protest, this becomes kind of the shorthand prescription for what's wrong with the people or that they're all doing it. And I just don't buy it. I mean, I'm sure that maybe there are a couple of knuckleheads that are doing stupid and hateful things among the group, but the vast majority of them are they're Canadian truckers. I mean, how bad can they be, right? They're ordinary working class people. And this becomes kind of the go-to explanation for everything. It's really disappointing because when you do actually have cases of racism that occur, people don't believe it anymore.
Yeah, I also just want to mention it was John Lewis who claimed that he was called racial slurs by the Tea Party. There was zero evidence for it, and in fact, there was evidence that.
Well, we
conflicted with it.
hear the same thing with Chuck Schumer and the January 6th protesters. He said they were yelling things about Jews, and everyone was like, "Oh, come on!" The rioters did a lot of things, but that one is just so over the top, hard to believe.
Yeah. Show me the footage.
This is funny. Check this out. They say. He said people were waving hateful flags, including swastikas and the Confederate flag. All right, well, I did see a photo of someone with a Nazi flag, and I'm genuinely confused by it. But, I guess, look, there are going to be people, and they're going to do dumb stuff or believe bad things. The Confederate flag is the one that's really weird to me. Y'all are in Canada.
I know.
What are you doing?
It's those guys in Saskatchewan, right?
Yeah, right. Even if someone there was legitimately like, I'm going to wave this flag, I'd be like, why?
Right. Well, the other thing, too, is these protests happen. It happened in Occupy Wall Street. These truckers show up, who's to say the guy with the Nazi flag is a trucker? It may have just been some Nazi who was around who was like, I'm going to go in the crowd and I'm going to wave my flag around.
That's the thing, too. I was at a protest in Boston, and I was Antifa on one side, the left, and the right on the other side. And I was talking to some guy from the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. And I asked him what they were doing, what their plan was. And he was like, we just want, healthcare for people and better policing. And I was like, what about, what would you say to the critics who would say that you guys are just communists and that this is a front and once you get power? He was like, that's not true. We don't endorse that stuff. And then I asked him what he thought about the right. And he was like, look, you got a bunch of far right extremists and racists. I mean, look, they're waving Confederate flags over there. And I was like, well, that's one guy with a Confederate flag. He's like, yeah, well, they're all standing around him, aren't they? And I was like, well, you guys are waving communist flags. He's like, no, we aren't. And I turned around and 20 feet away, I'm like, there's a gigantic Soviet Union flag and they're waving it. And he went, well, that's not ours. And I was like, right. Well, the guys over there, it's got one guy with a Confederate flag. I mean, you don't want to throw everybody, I understand there's, different groups of people here. And, I don't know if they understand what they're saying when they lump everyone in. But it's the same old smear. And this one, I got to admit, it's just outright impressive. It's just like the degree to which the media and the politicians are desperate to go. These Canadian men were waving Confederate flags. It's like, well, are you? It's you know what it is? It's they're obsessed with American media.
Right.
So this is American, left sentiment seeping into Canada. Because I don't, look, Canadians that are listening, explain to me why someone would wave the Confederate flag. I don't get it.
The North will rise again.
Yeah, what? They're north of the North.
Yeah. Exactly.
The North will rise again,
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly. No, it's so bizarre. Also, I'm still getting a kick out of stealing food from homeless people. That's hysterical. Who decided? Who printed that? Is there a story to go along with this?
There's a story that some of the people at the protest went to a homeless shelter and demanded they give food to the truckers, and the homeless shelter agreed to de-escalate things. And then I'm willing to bet. I'm willing to bet that it was some people walked up to the homeless shelter and said, "Hey, would you guys be willing to give food to the truckers?" And they went, "Yeah, sure." And they went, "Thank you." And they're like, oh, they stole our food. And they called the press, help us, please.
Come over the table.
Something so it's mainstream press.
But you
it's
do have to.
Press.
I agree with you that it's probably blown out of proportion, but you do have to be careful with large groups of people moving across countries like that. I think about the Crusaders in the Crusades, man, because it would be all benevolent. Yay, we're fighting for God, we're Christian, but they're still human and they need food, so they just pillage on the way. They just take people's food. They just kill. They shack up at people's houses. So it can get pretty bad. But this is a different story. This is people in trucks.
It should be condemned, right? No matter what, be like, hey, look, if that really happened, of course no one's okay with it. There's a story about a guy, apparently someone threw, feces at someone's house because they had a pride flag. And I'm like, well, that sounds really absurd to me.
Was it a monkey?
But
that's insane.
Yeah,
What human being does that?
It sounds really absurd, but you know what? I don't care. Condemn it outright.
Right.
Yeah. Nobody's okay with that.
Right.
And if anybody involved in the trucker protest should be like, we're so sorry someone would do that to you guys. They should just outright be like, no one here agrees with that. We're sorry it happened. And with the tens of millions of dollars raised, if it were me, that's what I'd do. I'd say, we're going to clean that up for you.
Right.
We're going to cover the
Amen.
cost of that
Amen.
because we want to make sure, in fact, I would even allocate money to general street cleaning. I'd say we're going to bring in a lot of people. We got a lot of trucks coming through. We want to make sure that we can leave the place where you live clean and tidy up. In fact, there was what was that protest where everyone cleaned up afterwards recently? I can't remember what it was. We were talking about it a few months ago.
Oh, I
Like
don't
a
know.
bunch of right-wing people came and they protested.
I know what you're talking
And they all
about,
cleaned up the
Tea Party
garbage.
used to do that though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you look at these left-wing rallies at the Women's March, it's just totally trashed.
Right.
Disgusting.
Right.
Just obliterated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here we are.
So where does this end, Tim? I mean, you've
Well,
got these guys protesting. Where does this end?
People are still. We have some super chats. We save them for the end, but people are mentioning that the convoy is not even in the city yet.
Oh, really?
Like it's been it was 50 miles long, and so you have 50,000 truckers. So what we're seeing is just the tip, the tip entering.
Yeah, well, I just want to say I'm so proud of Canada and Canadians
Me
here.
too.
My whole life I had this perception that they were much more complacent, and I think that's the image of them that's sold to us, especially because their government is so much more restrictive than ours. But not long ago, I started to actually speak to people from Canada, and I found that many of them are really quite convicted and based and actually understand what's going on and want to resist tyranny. And so I love that they're sending this message to the world.
Amen.
I don't know for sure if most Canadians would be like, "Yo, let's join the Americans instead of the British." Like if they had to pick, but I imagine they'd be like, "Yeah, all right."
They picked the
What
French.
you mean during the Revolutionary War?
No, like today, if you got to side with democratic freedom, democratic republicanism, or if you got to side with the monarchy, you side with democratic republicanism.
Yeah. Quebec was the 14th colony, though. They said no. They were like, we will not declare independence.
It's an interesting point you make because I was just reading a book on the American Revolution, War for Independence. And, I always kind of thought like everybody was on board with kicking the British out. And the best estimate was like 1/3 of them wanted independence, 1/3 of them were loyal, and the other third were kind of in between. And you kind of wonder, is that the way it always is? These big changes that you have, what's going on in Canada right now, is it kind of the rule of thirds? Right? That it's not an overwhelming majority of people. And you got to persuade that other third. So the things you were talking about cleaning up the streets, about condemning things, that's a way to win that other third and get the majority.
But I kind of feel like we're almost to the point where there is no other third. We looked at a lot of polling. We've looked at a lot of polling over the past several months. The independent base is melting.
Yeah.
As people keep switching. So there's people switching from, at least in the U.S.,
Right.
Democrat to Republican. Independents are being pulled left and right, with the biggest group of independents going Republican. The Republican Party is starting to balance out and gain on the Democratic Party, but there's almost no middle anymore.
Yeah.
If you're a centrist, I feel like this show we do is a balance of opinion. It's called Right Wing by the Left,
Right.
And it's the most insane thing because I watch some conservative shows and I'm like, I can certainly see the difference between the show we do and the show they do, and so can our viewers.
Yeah.
But if you're on the left, it's all right wing.
Right.
So when you get to that point, it's almost like, do you really win that third? Or, I guess so. Obviously, we're trying to convince those people to join freedom. And I think it's working because even Democrat voters are switching over to Republican. Not that Republican is the right answer, mind you. It's just like people feel like it's their only alternative.
Right.
But things are hyperpolarizing.
Right. But there are a group of people who are kind of apolitical, right? They have cultural opinions, but apolitical. And I agree with you. It's a diminishing group to what it used to be. But I just want to believe and hope that there is a persuadable group in the country and that you can. And that's why you need to do these things and demonstrate, how important your views and values are and do things like you were saying, clean up the streets. And
I think everyone is persuadable to a certain degree. And I think it's not about a middle ground, a 1/3. I think we're actually looking at Democrat voter base. We're looking at default liberal types. I think that's what Andrew Breitbart called them.
Right.
Default liberal. So they vote Democrat. They align with the Democratic Party. They say that they're Democrats. And now they're watching what's going on and they're rolling their eyes and saying, yo, I'm out.
Yeah.
Many of them are voting for Republican. Many, I think Pew referred to them as the stressed sideline.
Yeah.
But I don't think, it's large enough at this point. I think what's actually happening is shows like this, shows like Joe Rogan and other shows, even conservative ones and even some left ones like Jimmy Dore, are eroding at the establishment narrative. And it's resulting in people just saying, I'm done with that group of people. The celebrity message. Look at that story. Waving Nazi flags and hate symbols. Like, seriously?
Right.
There was a tweet from Kurt Schlichter. It was really funny. I can't remember exactly what he said, but he was like, the left is really mad when the workers of the world are uniting. Or whatever. like it's kind of funny how that's working
Yeah.
out, right? And these are truckers. These are like typically younger to middle-aged guys who are just driving on the road, and people of all different backgrounds, honestly, who drive trucks, but not the kind of people you expect to be marching around throwing bricks through windows.
Right.
No.
And here we are with the smears and the manipulation and.
No, I mean, yeah, well, these are people with a sense of responsibility. They have jobs. That's the entire reason that they're protesting. It's for their rights as workers. These are not irresponsible teenagers who are going out trying to destroy things like we saw for an entire summer. And that was never condemned by any of the people who are condemning all of these truckers for something that a fringe minority within their group is doing, and who, quite frankly, we don't even know is a fringe minority within their group. These could just be randos showing up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you asked, like, where does this all go? You know what's fascinating is that this story is happening in Canada. And, I was talking with, people just before the show, and I think it was my brother who said it's like a global civil war almost. Because it's not just the United States that's experiencing this cultural rift. It's Europe, Canada, the United States.
Australia.
And to a certain extent, Australia and New Zealand. But Australia, man, oof, things are bad there.
What is it? The British Empire is crumbling? Is that what basically finally?
Yeah, maybe
After
this
like
is it.
600 years or something?
It's
500
it's the
years?
culture that was born out of mostly, I guess, British colonization.
Due to physics. They figured out physics first, Isaac Newton, so then they had long-range cannon fire from boats, and they dominated the sea, basically.
And steam Gatling guns I was reading about allowed them to just dominate. But it's interesting. It's not just the former British colonies and kind of the Commonwealth. There's parts of Europe too, but it really does feel like people say Western civilization and all that stuff, and I'm like, it is very much like Canada, the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, Britain, the Five Eyes Spy Club, whatever you want to call it. Certain parts of Europe, but you look at some of these European countries, and they're like either getting rid of their COVID mandates completely and just go back to normal. And then you look at the United States, you look at Canada, you look at the UK, and the same culture war thing is happening across the board. So why is that? I don't know, but when I talk about the potential for civil war and stuff like that, I do find it fascinating that now the establishment left is completely on board with the narrative. You've got this one guy who put out a book recently, The Next Civil War. You've got MSNBC talking about, you got the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic. They're all now saying, like, where are we headed? And then if you actually, when we look at what's going on with the truckers and we look at how Trudeau responds, when they start claiming that working class people in trucks are like evil white supremacists, Nazis and all that stuff, I'm like, there is no convincing this other side. You either concede to them, give them concession, or you assert yourself now and recognize the groups are two completely separate groups that will not ever work together.
There's no convincing them because Klaus Schwab, and I don't want to put it all on you, Klaus, there's probably other people involved, they don't want to not think this. They're intentionally choosing to believe that there's some sort of rift. So it's like you can't convince someone that is going to choose to believe it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I see Luke's in the comments trying to
Luke,
comment.
help me, Luke. What am I missing?
No, we don't read his comments now. He left us.
Yeah, he did.
So we'll just ignore Luke's comments.
That's
No, Luke said it was it's called the Great Reset.
It's part of the Great Reset, yeah.
Maybe, but
Reset.
it's Adrian Curry commented too that it's China, that's sowing this dissent. I wonder what your thought is, Peter, on this culture war that's happening in Canada, the U.S., and the U.K. Some have suggested, we've had guests on the show that say, China's got troll armies that sow dissent, and they push these messages, and they're very divisive. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think it is a factor. I think it's simplifying it somewhat, but I think the fundamental debate is, where do our rights come from? And people on the left say that our rights come from government. Government tells us what our rights are. And if you're somebody, I don't even want to say necessarily conservative or right wing, I think it's just a way of viewing it. The other alternative view is that, no, our rights come from God or come from the fact that we are human beings and that we are sovereign. And it seems to me that's what so many of these debates are about. And China, I think, is playing a big role. They have these troll armies that try to pick fights and sow division online. One of the things I talk about in the book are these very wealthy Chinese oligarchs.
The book Red-Handed.
Yeah, the book Red-Handed, exactly. A lot of these oligarchs that made their money with these state-owned companies or these state-linked companies like Alibaba and whatnot. There's a guy featured in the book named Joe Tsai. He lives in California. He's worth $20 billion, very tight with the CCP government. And he goes on college campuses saying there are no human rights problems in China, everything's great. But at the same time, he's given $100 million to Black Lives Matter causes. And he talks about how unjust America is and how, does he have a right to do that? Sure. But how can you in any universe argue that America is this horribly unjust, bigoted society and say that communist China is a great place to live.
It's interesting. China versus America is very much the same culture war as internally in America, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of I'll break down what I mean. The left is willing to, the establishment left and many leftists, a cultural leftists, lie, cheat, and steal to say whatever they have to say in order to win. They'll ban, censor, shut down, silence, etc.
Yeah.
The right is constantly trying to play by some kind of rules. And I don't mean like the establishment right. I mean the culture war right, which includes libertarians, moderates, post-liberals, etc. They're constantly saying things that, it's remarkable. I'm not going to get into the overt specifics, but it's obvious to anybody who watches, the right is constantly trying to have a conversation with the left that the left is uninterested in having.
Right.
The left has asserted its position is true and unfalsifiable, and so be it, therefore. But the right keeps saying, let's work out a deal. Simple example is like, Joe Rogan and Spotify. They want to ban Joe Rogan. They want to shut his show down, so they start pulling their music off the platform. In response, Joe and Spotify give some concessions. Okay, we'll put advisories on these podcasts. But what about podcasts with Fauci? Are they going to include Dr. Robert Malone in those advisories? Right. They're not going to do it. Right. So what keeps happening is the freedom-loving individuals keep conceding some points to the authoritarian left. Now, on the grand international scale, it's the same thing with China. China is absolutist, the Communist Party. You oppose us, you get crushed. Who was that guy? Jack Ma, was that his name?
Yeah.
Gone. Money wiped away because how dare you?
Right.
But in the United States, we don't do that. To a certain degree, you'll get canceled if you cross the line and you'll lose, because once again, it's the authoritarian left. But because of this power imbalance and I would call it integrity and principle imbalance, China can look at someone like LeBron James and say, we're going to give you $10 million, never talk bad about us. And he goes, you got it.
Yeah.
Then he comes to the United States where the left plays by a similar game and they say, don't screw with us. We're the ones who are going to make sure your contracts stay in. But if you challenge us, we'll get them revoked. Yeah. So what happens? America's really bad. Why? The left agrees and the Chinese Communist Party agrees.
Right.
Those that are playing by the rules are getting wiped out.
Yeah. And bizarrely, there's a consistency to that the United States is terrible and China is great. And in both cases, you get paid. You don't pay any price really in today's culture, popular culture, for, disagreeing with BLM. I mean, you get canceled. So the path to least resistance is basically to embrace these sort of left-wing ideas. And it's the same thing with China. And you never pay a price for it. I mean, as I point out in the book with LeBron James, everybody knows the recent thing about the tweeting about Hong Kong and how he was defending them. It goes back. I mean, he's been doing this for like 15 years. There was a crisis you guys might remember back in 2007, 2008, Darfur. You had in Sudan, 200,000 black Christians were slaughtered in the South by this regime. The regime was backed by the Chinese government. And there was actually a petition in the NBA to call out China because they were backing this regime that was slaughtering black Christians. And LeBron James refused to sign the petition. So for a guy who says Black Lives Matter, horrific. For a guy who believes Black Lives Matter, as we all do, those Black lives did not matter to him because he did not want to offend China.
But come on, Peter. Just I want you to imagine something, all right?
Yeah.
It's a snowy, beautiful mountain. You're up top in a big 8,000 square foot cabin. The whole north face of the building is one big glass window, and you wake up and you press the coffee button on your Keurig and it makes you a nice hot cappuccino. And you walk to the window and you look out at this beautiful sunset. And you smile to yourself and say, this $40 million cabin was worth selling out all of those suffering people, and you sip it. And that's what I imagine is going through LeBron and all these other guys' heads when they buy these properties, and the money is they genuinely believe it's worth it.
Well, and it's interesting that the people who are able to afford to buy off famous celebrities to espouse their political views are almost all on the left. And one question I want to pose to everybody is, when Justin Trudeau talks about these truckers, do you think he actually knows any? Do you think Justin Trudeau has anyone in his life who does that professionally? And I see it as a problem, not necessarily of income inequality, but of economic stratification. So in the past, income inequality existed, but you were hanging out with people who were in different income brackets. You knew farmers, you knew plumbers, you knew people who were in the working class, even if you had an accounting job. And a lot of that was the community that was built up at your church, and I can testify to that as well. At my church and in my social group, we're fortunate enough to have all sorts of people from different economic brackets because we're focused on a larger mission. But nowadays, people really gravitate towards their own in-group with respect to wealth, and then they sort of pat themselves on the back because they think their particular in-group, because it's left-leaning, represents the views of the working class. But then when they hear what actual working class people have to say, they lose their minds. So I think at the end of the day, a question that you need to ask yourself about any political leader is this a person who would fit in better with like Walmart shoppers or Whole Foods shoppers? And Justin Trudeau is not going to fit in with a group of people who live normal lives.
He's not a Whole Foods shopper. He's what's that place called? Erewhon? Is that what it's called?
Never been there.
But is it called Erewhon?
I don't know.
I've never heard that name.
Maybe
Wegmans? I don't know.
No, there's a
Like the
really
Turkish president?
really expensive grocery store
That's
in
probably
LA
why
that
I've
all
never
the
heard of it,
celebrities go to. Maybe I got the name totally wrong.
Yeah.
Let me look it up.
But it's like I was
There's
saying
Aldi, but that's not really
No,
expensive.
no,
Aldi, that's where we
Whole
went as
Foods.
kids.
There's,
Yeah.
no, there's a
Aldi's
very
what it's about.
expensive store, and it's in LA, and I was outside once, and I saw Jake Gyllenhaal like walk in, and it's like it's where the celebrities shop. That's just what's funny is yeah, I think you make a really great
I know
point.
what you're talking about. I've been
Is
there.
it-
Erewhon.
Arrow-
I don't know
Erewhon?
how it's pronounced. Erewhon.
Yeah, you looked it up.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay, there you go. Justin Trudeau is the kind of guy who like walks into a grocery store and there's no milk, and he's like, "There must be a mistake. Where's the milk?" And then they're like, "Well, the truckers have stopped driving." He's like, "What does that have to do with the milk?" Well, Mr. Trudeau, the truckers bring the milk. They do?
What?
And I honestly think that when it comes to people like Trudeau, or when it comes to so many of these woke left-wing people, first of all, having those views is almost certainly an indicator that you spend most of your time with really wealthy people.
Yeah.
And secondarily, if you do hold those views, generally when you're dealing with a working class person, it's because you're telling them what to do, and they have to because it's their job. And so I think that's a big part of the reason why they're completely unwilling to negotiate. Because from their perspective, they always get to tell people in this bracket what to do, and they obey. So when they stand up for themselves, they can't stand it. And it's not just that they can't stand it, they can't even comprehend it. It has to be racism. They have to put it in this box of some sort of bigotry because that's the only way they know how to analyze the world.
Is Trudeau a servant of the Canadian people, like in
What
the
do you
United
think?
States, or is he a puppet of the Queen?
good question.
He's supposed to be a servant, but it's interesting at the heart of what you're saying and what you, Seamus, were saying earlier. There's a quote in the book I have because the Trudeau family has this long history of relationship with the Chinese government, and there's this amazing question that Justin Trudeau is asked in 2012. He's a member of Parliament, and he's asked, "Is there anybody on the world stage that you, as a political figure, sort of really admire? Some country in the world?" And he doesn't say the United States. He doesn't say Great Britain. He says China.
Wow.
He says, "I admire China." And they ask, "Why do you admire China?" And his answer, to your point, Seamus, says, "Well, if you're the leader of China, you can just get shit done. You can get
Wow.
things done.
Wow.
It's efficient." And he talks about climate change. And he says, you don't have to debate all these things. You just get things done.
You know how you respond to
Exactly.
someone like that? Like if I was sitting down, if I was talking to Trudeau and he said that, I'd be like, Justin, spot on. I mean, when you've got a global pandemic, for instance, and you can just weld the doors shut of poor people,
Exactly.
so they just die,
Right.
and you don't got to worry about a pandemic. I mean,
Right.
why should I get sick? Let them die. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like look, I'm trying to build a highway, for instance, and these poor people think they can own land. Just
get 'em out of the
plow
way.
them out of the way.
Yeah.
Where do they live? Who cares? Screw them. They're poor people. They're
Right.
not paying taxes.
Right,
There
right.
you go.
There's a certain efficiency to a dictatorship, and that's attractive to
Yep.
Justin Trudeau. And there's other people that say the same thing, but Trudeau, it's so interesting to me because it's exactly what you guys were saying earlier, that he doesn't have a connection. People become just these objects you move around on the chessboard, right? If you don't have a connection with them, if you don't know truckers, if you don't know farmers, they're things to be moved around on a chessboard, and that's the mentality of a dictator.
Exactly, and I apologize if I was a little snide to you in my reply to you, sort of asking if Trudeau was a servant. But I also think that it's so telling that when Trudeau is looking at communist China, the person he empathizes with is the dictator, the
Yeah.
person in control.
Right.
Like he doesn't look at communist China
Right.
and think about the people living there and how horrible that would be. He immediately associates himself with the communist dictator. That's
Right.
very telling.
Right.
How that doesn't end a political career, I will never know.
I like how people call Justin Trudeau Castro
Yes.
instead of Castro, like Castro. Well, because they
Is it EAU?
there
Castro
are
with
there are
the
people
accent
who
figure.
genuinely believe he's the son of Fidel Castro.
Look similar.
Right.
But
Right.
just in terms of being a dictator, just Castro is so on point.
He was born to Pierre, right? Pierre
Yes,
Trudeau.
yeah.
And so he was basically raised bred to be a leader. I don't like that. That's not the right word.
Yeah.
Bred to be a prime minister.
Right.
Obviously, well, I think he might be a poor leader.
I agree.
So what? So he was just raised psychotically in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you look at the family history. Like his dad, Pierre Trudeau, he was the one that opened up relations between Canada and China, diplomatic relations. And then when he left the prime ministership, and he had been like this pro kind of Mao, he wrote this like ridiculous book where he went to China and he, meets these, pioneer children, like these 7-year-old kids running around with the red flags and chanting these Maoist sayings. And he's saying this is the future of the country. But when he leaves the premiership in Canada, he opens up a consultancy helping getting businesses juiced in with the communist leadership in China because he had a good relationship with them. So that's where the Trudeau family money comes from. And so Justin grew up very privileged, courtesy of the fact that his dad was doing all these deals in mainland China.
I had no idea. That's where the family wealth comes from?
Yeah,
for
that's where the family wealth from.
Wow.
From a series of deals that he did. And Justin's got a younger brother who's kind of a foreign policy advisor of his. His name's Alexander. Has written some like insanely horrific things about China. Again, kind of this admiration for dictatorship. People don't understand it. He says, like, Canadians in a way are less free than people in China. It's ridiculous stuff. And that's sort of the background of what Justin Trudeau grew up in, what he heard from his dad, what he heard from his brother, and it now influences the way that he deals with China. So when he sees truckers in Canada, it's not hard to take a leap and say, this is imagine how a Chinese leader would look at truckers in China if they were doing the same thing.
He goes, I really wish I could just take their organs. It would be a far more efficient country. That'd be a way better way of doing things. Thank you, Justin.
But do you think that China is, we've asked a lot of people this, is actively engaged in sowing the conflict in our countries,
yes,
making the culture war worse?
Absolutely. And you look at various things. You look at the donations that some of these guys that are connected to the regime are making. They're making donations to these divisive groups. You look at, I think, the whole question of COVID. I mean, I'm not an expert, but you at least got to entertain the idea that it was a lab leak. But in Congress, there hasn't been a single congressional hearing about the origins of COVID. And I'm convinced part of it is because Nancy Pelosi and her family have their deals with Canada.
There have been hearings that have addressed it.
Yeah, but Rand Paul has raised the question. But they to have a congressional hearing that says we're going to explore the origins of COVID and lab leak, Nancy Pelosi has refused to allow any of them being held on the House side. The other thing I would add is on China is look at the whole fentanyl issue.
Absolutely.
I mean, where does the fentanyl come from?
And it's not just fentanyl; it's designer drugs as well.
Yes.
Are you familiar? So for those that aren't familiar, designer drugs typically are some kind of narcotic or drug that is slightly altered in such a way that it now is legal. Although, good luck explaining to the cop the molecules that I have here are slightly different. But a lot of this stuff comes from China. Yeah. They are producing drugs and shipping them over here illegally, and they're killing people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fourth and fifth generational war. It is indirect, but it is massively damaging. The fentanyl problem, and then potentially the drugs that come here, designer drugs or otherwise, could be laced with something and cause even more problems.
Yeah, this is the reversal of the opium wars.
It is the opium wars.
Yeah,
I think we're still in them.
Yeah, it's revenge.
It's 100 years later, 120 years later, we're still in the opium wars. Now they're just feeding it back to us through Mexico.
Yeah.
So explain that. What does that mean?
Well, the opium wars, because of the opium trade in Asia, the British Empire and other powers sort of divided up. They were so hungry to get access to opium and export it that they took over portions of China, and China became, not completely, but kind of a vassal state. And they had a huge drug problem in China as well because of this demand. And then they finally gained enough sort of national sovereignty to sort of beat it away. But you actually find literature of, Chinese military officers and others saying when fentanyl comes up, well, this is revenge for the opium wars.
Was that related to the Boxer Rebellion?
That was a part of it. Yeah, that was part of it. But China has been obsessed, and I understand because it's a terrible part of their history, with extracting revenge on the Western powers because they were so weakened. They were this empire that had been largely defeated by the West, and they want revenge. And you see Xi talks about this all the time. talks about this all the time, that by 2049, they're going to seize the commanding heights on the global stage. They're going to, overcome the United States, and there's going to be payback for what the Western powers did to his country 150 years earlier.
So what then is Klaus? How does Klaus Schwab fit into this? Is he like accelerating this communist insurgents into the United States?
It's so funny. On all these guys, you look at, some like Elon Musk and these guys. Elon Musk says some great things. And then he says some crazy things about China, about how China is more representative than the United States. And I mean, it's just crazy stuff. And you have to decide with all these guys, whether it's Klaus Schwab, are they just doing it for the money? Or do some of them actually believe it? And I think some of them actually believe it. I think a lot of them do it because they want access to China. They want access to the Chinese market. A guy like Klaus Schwab, I think, is a true believer. And he said, that hey, they've got good market reforms in China. And you got this dictatorship, but that's less important because they've got this market that they've set up. It's crazy stuff. So he's, I think, a true believer. He's not just doing it for the money.
Is it because the Chinese bank, does it get its money from the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland as well as?
Yeah.
So could Klaus and his buddies just shut off the Chinese economy so they're really not afraid of the Chinese government?
It'd be hard to shut off the Chinese economy because it's so wedded in so many ways, financially and otherwise. And that's been the thing, right? We were told for 30 years, if we just traded with them, if we just gave them, access to our financial markets, if we let them watch our movies and, buy our clothes, they're going to become more like us.
Yeah.
And no, they haven't. They're a dictator. We've become more like them.
Amen.
In a lot of respects.
Elon Musk is tweeting support for the truckers.
Yes.
And there's rumors going around. I haven't verified this, but liar.com is reportedly owned by Elon Musk. I don't know if that's true, but people are claiming it is.
Interesting.
And it links to Trudeau's Wikipedia page. And it's associated with a $42,000 donation. I don't know if any of that's true, so fact check that one.
Yeah.
But it's a viral tweet going around where people are claiming this.
Yeah.
And maybe Elon Musk is just playing both sides.
Yeah, it could be. And look, I think in Musk's case, if I were to guess, he's got a big Tesla factory in China. They built it for him. China's a big growth market. He's saying stuff because he wants access to the market. But some of these Wall Street guys, they are true believers. They believe in these leaders. They think they're better than ours. They think the system's better than ours. And to my mind, they're just sellouts.
Well, can I ask you, how could they possibly believe something like that? Are they genocide deniers? Do they pretend that it's not actually happening over there? Or do they think that their market is so efficient that it justifies that kind of behavior?
Well, so I'll give you an example that sort of blows my mind. There's a guy, I don't know if you guys have heard of him. His name's Ray Dalio. He runs the largest hedge fund in the United States, Bridgewater Associates. And he wrote a book in 2017 called Principles, which is ironic based on what I'm about to tell you. In that book, he talks about the second most powerful man in China named Wang Qishan, who he says, I've known him for a long time. And he says, Wang Qishan has almost helped me tap the secrets of the universe. And he talks about this quasi-religious experience that he's had just meeting with this guy. He's so wise. I've learned so much from him. And he's been this remarkable force for good for like 30 years. And I thought, well, who the hell is this Wang Qishan guy? So I started looking it up. He's Xi's enforcer. He's in charge of party discipline. He's the guy that throws people in jail and has them tortured. Now, why would you, as a smart guy like Ray Dalio, write something like that? And then you realize that he wrote that, he said a bunch of other nice things, and then his hedge fund got the first opportunity of any other hedge fund in the world to sell hedge fund products to the Chinese.
I guess if you're elite, if you're extremely wealthy, you feel safe and secure in doing your dealings.
Yes.
And then it's the people of the world who suffer for it.
Yes. Yeah. If you're elite, I mean, you're assuming if things go south, you're still going to be okay. And your family's going to be safe. I think you're right. Yeah.
And, not to make any specific accusations about Ray Dalio here, right? But we do know statistically that people who trade on Wall Street are actually more likely to be psychopaths and sociopaths. Now, I can't give someone that kind of diagnosis, but those are the behaviors of a psychopath, to praise somebody who would do that kind of thing because you think it'll get you money.
We have this big story that I want to get into, and we find ourselves once again talking about Joe Rogan and Spotify, but this is a good example of the cultural imbalance. So the quick story is that Spotify is announcing an addition of content warnings over the criticism of Joe Rogan and COVID-19 misinformation. But we never get this the other direction. When Rachel Maddow or Fauci or CNN puts out bunk garbage, Twitter does not flag them. You put out something that goes against Fauci or Maddow or CNN, Twitter flags you. So Joe Rogan has on Sanjay Gupta, Mike Osterholm, experts, establishment voices. Nobody cares.
Right.
He has on McCullough and Malone, and it's the apocalypse. Joni Mitchell, these old aging hippies are like, I want censorship. And Niels Lofgren. Now, to be fair, they both Neil Young and Lofgren said, we don't want to censor Joe Rogan. We just want off the platform because we don't want to share it with him. Okay, that's actually respectable because that's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. If I was on a platform and I was like, I don't like that they support hate speech,
right.
I'll leave.
Yeah.
So good. Bye-bye. Leave.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
But we can see what happens from the backlash. You're never going to get a concession from the establishment to recognize independent voice. It's always the other way around. So long as this imbalance exists, we are all being pulled hard towards the authoritarian side of things. And that being said, a story like this, I think, just shows they have no effective means of stopping Joe Rogan, real conversations like this. So despite this being kind of bad, here's the big update. Spotify shares recover after Joe Rogan addressed the vaccine controversy as Taylor Swift fans call on her to pull her music from the streaming service. It's not going to happen. Spotify may suck on pay rates and all that, but the moment they come out and say, oh, okay, we'll do this little content warning, which ultimately I think will do nothing.
Right.
It may be a net negative in certain capacity. The Spotify shares rebound, and I think, Joe and everyone else is going to pull out of this, and they're going to walk away from this unscathed.
Yeah, I think the thing that helps Joe Rogan here is he's such an important part of the company because he's got such a massive audience. The interesting question, and I don't know the answer to it, is Spotify has a number of large Chinese investors that own portions of that. Does that play into this censorship? I don't know. We know with Twitter, Jack Dorsey hired senior executives because he wanted to break into China that had ties with the Communist Party. This censorship issue, we talked earlier about it. I think we are becoming more like China. China's not becoming more like us.
Right.
We're importing some of these censorship tools that they use.
Well, what do you think about BlackRock?
BlackRock is terrible. They're the focus of my book. Think about this for a second.
Real quick, sorry.
Yeah.
Can you explain what BlackRock is?
Yeah, BlackRock is the largest financial asset manager in the world. And what does that mean? They manage $10 trillion. That's with a T. The gross national product of the United States is like 21 trillion. So they manage almost like 50% of the United States gross national product financially. So they are the 900-pound gorilla of world finance.
I want to show something real quick before we get into that in reference. This is something I've shown on the show before, but we'll show again in this context. This is something I posted, and I want to just issue the disclaimer before going through this. BlackRock owns basically everything, right? So I'm not trying to post these things to make an assertion of some grand conspiracy, but I think it's important to show the business connections.
Yeah.
So this is Neil Young sells catalog rights to Mercuriadis's Hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Blackstone and Hypnosis Song Management launch a $1 billion partnership. Blackstone announces appointment of Jeffrey B. Kindler, former chairman and CEO of Pfizer, as a senior advisor. Spotify to pull Neil Young's music, objecting to Joe Rogan. So not that I think it's necessarily evidence that someone at Blackstone, picked up the phone and said, we need to pull in Neil Young on this one and get him. But it shows that it very well may have been a meeting where they're just like, look, Joe Rogan's show is bad for us. It hurts our profits and shares. What are our assets? I'm like, well, we do have this music catalog that does work with Spotify. All right, get him on the phone and see if there's anything there. It's possible. It's entirely possible. Blackstone, it's got its pinky and everything, and it's got interests and a conflict of interest in all of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, BlackRock is massive and huge, and they are very interested and supportive of this kind of authoritarian model. So think about this for a second. In 2017, the Communist Party of China goes to Hong Kong. They have the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, all these companies on it. Goes to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, says every company listed here has to put in its company charter that the Communist Party of China gets the final decision in every corporate decision. Now, this had to be voted on by the shareholders in these companies, right, in Hong Kong. So Vanguard, big financial company, votes against it. Absolutely, we do not want this.
Wow.
BlackRock voted in favor.
But isn't Vanguard bad as well?
Yeah, I'm sure they're bad. But I'm saying on this, in contrast, I mean, at least some of them got it right. BlackRock actually said, no, we actually think this is a good idea.
What's the GDP of China?
The GDP of China is probably about 60% of the United States. So 12.
BlackRock might be like, we can take them.
We're getting there, yeah.
No, for real.
Yeah.
I mean, but China's growing fast.
Yeah, it is growing fast, 7-8% clip, and they're expected to surpass us in a few years.
So I wonder if, we look at stuff like Joe Rogan's show and the fact that he's just some regular guy, kind of comedian, populist, being so successful. I look at a lot of this and I'm like, clearly the free speech is winning. But if in the long run, China's growth outweighs ours, will it matter if we have cultural victories when the economic victory is in China's lap?
It's a good question, and I think it depends on what we think the average American's going to do. I still think the average American is the center of gravity. Ultimately, if the average American rises up and says we're not going to tolerate this, they can still win over elites. And I want to believe that there's still the fight there, right? That the average American, when they see these things being eroded, they get pushed far enough, they're going to stand up and say, "Push no more. We're done."
Yeah, but I think what we saw with the COVID lockdowns. A good portion of this country are just like, tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah. Although they didn't lock down in certain states because I knew they couldn't get away with it. But you're right. California, New York, a lot of places, a lot of people kind of caved, right?
Yeah, but we knew we couldn't count on them anyway. If something were to happen with China. Oh no, the Californians and the New Yorkers were no help.
Well, that's the scary future projection. It's really funny. There was I got a Facebook reminder, and it was like old memories. And it was a post I made in 2017 where I was like, authoritarian dictatorship is coming to the United States. It was early 2017. I said, the conspiracy theory is Trump being the Trojan horse for authoritarianism because he will be demonized and vilified to the point where it rallies the left into accepting authoritarianism. And then in the name of stopping the rise of fascism, you get hardcore far left pro-China,
right?
And then that it was kind of just like something I'd seen on the internet and I typed up. But there's other theories, other I shouldn't say theories, but like people genuinely believe if it came to like Donald Trump winning in 2024, that people in California would clap and cheer when China landed, U-boats or something on the shores to come in and save them from fascism or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, you look at history when dictators have taken over, they never come and say, "Hey, I'm going to be your dictator. I'm going to control your life." Yeah. It's always, "I'm going to protect you from this terrible, evil thing that's even worse than me."
Well, so I don't know if you saw the Boston Globe story from 2020 election where they said, it was like Podesta and Donna Brazile were war gaming as the Democrats, and they had pressured the West Coast states to secede from the union should Donald Trump win. Now, if that kind of sentiment actually did exist, what do you think? Like, let's imagine there is some kind of national divorce or whatever.
Right.
And then come 2024, Donald Trump is like, got his hand on the Bible and he's like, "I am the new 47th president" or whatever. And then California, Oregon, Washington, they're like, "Yo, we out."
Yeah.
What happens? I mean, does China just see an opportunity? Do they just say, "Oh, it's fair game"? Because who's got Hawaii now that the Western states are cut off from the rest of the country? Who's going to defend Taiwan? I mean, I kind of think Taiwan would fall before then if that were the case.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think China, of course, would love a divided America, and they're pushing for it in so many different ways. And unfortunately, there are a substantial number of Americans, I would say mostly on the political left, although there's probably some on the right, that actually fear their fellow Americans more than they fear a regime in China or these other cases. And that's just tragic. That's just tragic. And yeah,
well, I mean, look at the defense that the establishment waged for China when Trump was engaging in the trade war and things like that. It was like, "Oh, this is wrong and bad. You shouldn't do this. It's going to destabilize the global economy. It's bad for everybody." And it's like, yo, they have concentration camps. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And the Chinese leaders said, that their best lobbyists were Wall Street. They didn't have to lobby. I mean, they outright said it. We don't have to lobby the Trump administration on tariffs because Wall Street will do it for us.
Wow. Yep.
Unbelievable.
So where does that line? Do you think? Are you familiar with Thucydides' trap?
Yes.
Do you think for those aren't familiar, it's a rising economic power reaching the dominant power? It typically results in war. Do you think we're heading in that direction?
I think so in a way, but I also think there's a very real opportunity. I think China is a brittle regime. I don't think it has the widespread support that people think it does. I think it's very akin to the Soviet Union. You have this caste of people on the top that benefit from the system, but you've got a lot of people that are resentful of it. In China, you have the economic growth you didn't have in the Soviet Union, but you have a huge problem in the fact that, China had this one-child policy for so long. And so what ended up happening was, parents wanted to have one child. They wanted it to be a boy. They didn't want it to be a girl because a boy is going to provide for them in their old age. So the estimates are that in some cases, within the demographic group of like 25 to 40-year-olds, there may be like 150 million more men in China than there are women.
Now that is grounds for a civil war in that country.
Yes.
No joke. I mean, look, you want to get serious for a minute, and also people are going to laugh and probably roll their eyes, especially the feminists. But 150 million more men, you said?
Yes.
So those are going to be guys who women can't get dates.
Incels.
Right.
Seriously.
And they're gonna lose it.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
it's not about making fun of neckbeards. It's not about making fun.
Yes.
It's about young men who have literally no opportunity to fulfill a massive internal desire for having a family.
Right.
And they are going to have nothing.
Yeah.
They're going to lose their minds.
Well, when you look at the vast majority of the crime problem in this country, including really heinous, insane crimes that rarely occur, such as massacres or school shootings, or whether it's just street crime like a burglary, they're almost all committed by men who feel as if they have no buy-in to the system and they have no way to rise up and be successful. And a huge part of that is the ability to start a family.
Right.
And if you don't believe that there's any hope for that, you're going to become a deranged individual. If you don't have that hope, it's so necessary. And it's such an important part of being a man and a productive person in general. And so if China has 150 million men who have no prospect of ever being with a woman, that is going to be unbelievably and horrifically damaging to that country.
Except colonization.
Yeah.
So we are seeing the modern form of colonization from China.
Yeah.
As many people who live there to escape crowding and find better, better lives are leaving the country. So a lot of these young men might just say, I've got to leave China and go somewhere else to try and find a life.
And I just want to make this clear. When I'm talking about men who have no buy-in to the system, I'm not talking about like, oh, they're not accountable for their actions or something like that. But the link I'm trying to draw is usually when we talk about someone like a school shooter, for example, we'll highlight the fact that this was an incel, right? And like these are, it's not exactly the perfect term for it, but it's like you have 150 million incels.
You could get them VR porn. But I don't know if sticking people in a machine with digital pornography is enough to make them not psychotically. I mean, it's another kind of psychosis.
Ian, I got to say, that's absurd. Obviously, you get them waifu body pillows.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about after. I thought that one already hadn't worked out.
Hadn't worked out yet.
So we had to. I wonder if China's going to stick a bunch of people in pods, try and generate their piezoelectric heat for electricity, and hope they don't go crazy.
I'm with you to a certain degree, Ian, like VR girlfriends and stuff like that to try and, or like robots or something to try and, calm the rage. But I don't know about pulling a matrix on them in that capacity. Maybe
might be a little too premature.
Well,
I think leaving the country is a more fluid option.
I think we're going to see waves of adult Chinese men just moving out and trying to find wives in other places.
So now, if we can think 20 years in the future, what would we do now to present an environment for those people to come? Because we need to make way for these displaced Chinese men.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it to me, it's one example of the fact that China has problems too. It's not like they're this superpower that can't be, defeated. That they're inevitably going to be more powerful than us. So I think we need to recognize that, and we need to play to our strengths, not play to their strengths. And I think when you look at China, the problem is the Chinese Communist Party. It's not the Chinese people. Reagan said that in the Cold War. Our enemies are not the Russians; it's the Soviet leadership. And I view the same way with China. We've got to have that. Trump did some of that in his speaking. His Secretary of State did the same thing. Joe Biden lumps it all together. China is China. It's not. You got a clique that's running the country that is oppressing the rest of them, and then you've got the ordinary Chinese who, cannot be that happy with the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, let's talk about what's going on at home for a minute to see if we can clean up the mess down here. We got the story from the New York Post. Hunter Biden's former business partners cooperated completely with feds in tax probe. The New York Post reports Devin Archer, who was awaiting sentencing in an unrelated fraud case, is among 4 people reportedly referenced in a May 15, 2019 subpoena, first reported by the Post, sent to JP Morgan Chase Bank for records related to any transaction involving the Bank of China. The others include James Biden, a younger brother of President Joe Biden. A partial copy of the subpoena was posted online by the Marco Polo USA research group headed by Garrett Ziegler, who worked as a White House policy analyst under former President Trump. Mr. Archer was not aware of the specific subpoena from 2019, which appears directed to a bank. His lawyer, Matthew Schwartz, told the Post in an email. But Mr. Archer has cooperated completely with the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office investigation from the moment he became aware of it. So they're looking into transactions involving China. The first thing I want to say is, look, there may be some connection to Hunter Biden, but if you were to ask me, do I think anything in terms of accountability would happen to the Biden family, I would say probably not. Maybe if Donald Trump gets elected in 2024. But Peter, you seem to be much more of an expert than I. So what do you think?
Well, I don't know. You might be right, Tim. I think if the Republicans take the House and the Senate, you're going to get congressional hearings. Some of those committees have subpoena powers.
Will they impeach Joe Biden? I think they should.
Well, they may very well. I mean, one of the things that troubled me the most in this new book, I did the first Hunter Biden China stuff back in 2018 in a book that I wrote. And at that time, it was a story of like corruption and cronyism and self-dealing and all that. What we did more recently for this book is we went through the Hunter Biden laptop and we went through some of the emails of one of his business partners who gave us access to his Gmail account. And we wanted to figure out, so the Bidens got all these deals in China that Hunter wasn't qualified for. Who actually made it rain, right? Who actually gave the Bidens this money, which is like $31 million in deals? So we traced it back. And what we found is that there were 4 guys that set these deals up. Every single one of these guys has links to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. So like one guy named Che Fang set him up for a $20 million payday. Che Fang at the time was business partners with a vice minister of state security who's in charge of recruiting foreign spies for the Chinese. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, and every single case this was. So, the Biden case no longer is just cronyism and corruption. I mean, we have to entertain the notion that the Chinese targeted the Bidens, they got the Bidens, and that the Bidens are compromised. It's an intelligence operation. I mean, it has all the markings of it.
Isn't it crazy that we spent so many years talking about Trump and Russia?
Yeah.
But now we're here talking about Biden and China?
Yeah, and here, unlike the Trump case, I mean, when the Trump stuff, when the dossier first came out, okay, I fell for it. And I was like, hey, we got to look at this. Like, this looks serious. We got to investigate it. And then, 5 or 6 months later, you realize this thing is completely falling apart. But there, you had no money, right? You had this anonymous dossier, but you had no money. You had no deals. You had no, links to intelligence. With the Bidens, you've got money. Nobody disputes they got the $31 million. And now you've got the fact that the people that made these deals happen all have these intelligence links. So it's completely compromised. And I think that Congress needs to hold those hearings and they need to get the Bidens under subpoena to testify in front of Congress to explain it. But I agree with you. The law enforcement, I've kind of given up on the fact that they're going to hold these elites accountable. There's a different set of law and justice for elites than there is for ordinary Americans today.
And even as far as it can go with the congressional hearing, look, Fauci lied under oath on numerous occasions and nothing.
No accountability. No accountability. You're exactly right.
You look, I think at this point, we look at all the past stories we've already discussed, the split between the left and the right. I think it's fair. If I were to ask all of you listening, do you think when it comes to, say Joe Rogan or anybody else, that the left would be willing to compromise and say, oh, okay, we'll concede this point? The answer is, of course not. They won't. They'll keep pulling and pulling and pulling. It's only the right and the liberty side that keeps conceding. In that capacity, I think it's fair to realize there will never be federal law enforcement accountability for Joe Biden and his family, no matter how much gets reported on it, or Anthony Fauci, no matter how much it gets reported. In which case, what ends up happening is it doesn't matter if there's hard evidence or not. The Republicans come in and they'll be like, hey, we're going to impeach. Why? It's partisan.
Yeah.
We discussed this with, there was that Pennsylvania story about the judges striking down the mail-in voting law. I don't know if you heard that recently.
Yeah.
And the judge basically refused to rule on it during the 2020 election because they said, you waited until after your guy already lost to file this.
Right.
The judge had decided because of party affiliation, he would not rule on the merits. Because I assume your side is just doing this to win. If we're at the point where a judge won't look at the actual merits and will just say, well, you're team A, I'm team B, so I say you lose.
Yeah.
Well, that's happening in law enforcement. At what point do people just say the system is clearly broken? There's not going to be any accountability, so it's going to be lawfare, effectively. If the policy lawfare or whatever, if the Republicans win the House and the Senate, they're going to impeach Joe Biden for the sake of it. But this time, will they be able to muster up enough to actually get a conviction? I'd wager probably not. It'll be the exact same thing we saw. And it's basically just a tit for tat until finally the tower just crumbles and falls. Because, I don't know how our country can sustain this kind of hyper partisan political attacks and conflict,
Yeah, no, it's scary. I mean, the scenario you laid out is accurate and scary. And part of it is there's not a sense, I mean, you guys disagree with me, obviously, if you do. There just is not a sense of truth with a capital T anymore. And so what do I mean? It's like, in the case that you're talking about the judge, it's not a question of the merits of the case or the evidence. It's who's bringing the facts and the evidence. I mean, I face the same thing all the time. People say, oh, these are just right-wing attacks against the Bidens. And I'm like, explain to me which of these facts are right-wing. I mean, they're all from Chinese corporate documents and Hong Kong financial records. There's no right-wing facts and left-wing facts. They're facts. And you can debate them and you can say whether they're accurate, but we've reached this point. It's like this post-truth element where it doesn't really matter whether it's true. It's who's actually bringing the evidence. And I'm going to attack the messenger rather than actually deal with the underlying evidence. It's scary.
Well, it's simple. I mean, I think Jimmy Dore is a really great example. The dude's clearly economically and culturally left, but because he questions the establishment, he's right wing.
Yeah.
And that's look, they call me right wing, and I'm like, well, look, I'm centrist, so I can understand why they view me, and they'll say those things. But like, come on, Jimmy's basically a socialist, and I don't mean that as disrespectfully. I mean, I think he calls himself that, and they're starting to argue that he's like a right wing grifter.
Right.
So clearly, left and right just means whose side. It just means team A, team B. It doesn't even mean left and right anymore.
Yeah, and there's that Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald are kind of in the same boat. I mean, those guys are both left wing, but because they actually want to try to get to the truth, they get hammered.
Well, truth has a right-wing bias.
That's right.
Yeah, what was that, Colbert, huh?
Yeah,
nice try.
How much of a lie do we live in right now? How much truth can people handle in what increments when we start rolling out the truth?
Man.
Yeah.
You're getting philosophical on
They
us.
don't-
Yeah, we're built on a
The
house
answer
of
is-
cards,
the-
and if we start moving these cards around, there's a chance the entire thing's going to...
This is one of the theories that a friend of mine who's in D.C., former member of Congress, said, I said, they won't have these hearings on, the origins of COVID. And he said, well, of course they won't. And I said, what do you mean, though? Of course they won't. He said, because if they actually come to the truth, they'd have to do something about it.
Oh,
Yeah, we had Tom Garrett on, and he mentioned that when he was in Congress, the Republicans would come to him and be like, well, don't actually support our bill. Because then if we win, what do we have left?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so there were very much often stories like that, or stories of Republicans being like, oh, we can't support that bill. They'll call us racist.
Yeah.
So it's remarkable how when you learn how things are going behind the scenes, that it's all one big joke. It's one big game being played.
Well, and this is why, I mean, look at the rise, like you and Joe Rogan and some of the other people out there. I mean, you obviously have to be courageous of what you're doing, but part of it is too, you have a basis of financial independence based on the business that you've developed. And that's key. I mean, you think about people that get canceled, people that need to fit into the establishment as part of their business model. If you don't have that independence, I mean, you're screwed. And so, when you're talking about truth and how much truth do the average Americans want, you just look at leaders and they may know what the truth is, but they can't discuss it and enunciate it because it could destroy their livelihood. They don't have the independence that you have and other people
Well,
have.
I'll tell you, one thing that really drives a lot of these left activist types nuts is that here we have no investors, no big, institutional investors in any way.
Right.
And so there's always this narrative of like, oh, this person is funded by the Koch brothers or the Mercers.
Right.
And I've seen activists try to make that claim, like he must be getting funding from them. And it's no, just regular people are sick and fed up and have started to fund conversation that they think, works for them. For someone like Joe Rogan, I don't think he runs any kind of membership thing. He's just got ad revenue.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure if, the Spotify thing with Rogan resulted in him getting booted, and he announced sign up for Joe Rogan Premium, he'd be making 100 times, 10 times as much money than he's making now.
Right.
$100 million Spotify deal with 11 million listeners per episode.
Yeah.
Imagine if he got 1% to give $10 per month.
And they fear that.
Joe could make it 120 million per year.
Yeah.
just off of that.
No, they fear that. They fear the fact that you've got subscribers. They fear that there are these other independent sources of information out there because they can't get to the nub of it. And they can't eliminate it. And that's really, unfortunately, what the left wants is they want dominance. And here's the interesting question that I would ask you, because I have a theory on this. The left wants to shut down debate. It comes from a position of, real cultural strength. But I think it really shows their profound intellectual weakness. Because if they really believe, think about this. They shut down all these speakers from going on college campus. If they really felt like these conservative speakers going on college campus are these crazed, racists, misogynists, whatever, I'd say let them stand up there and embarrass themselves. But they don't want them to speak. They don't want them to speak because they know the power of the ideas. They are fundamentally lack confidence in their own ideas.
I think also on top of that, even if you did hear that person's ideas and reject them on their merits, it wouldn't be good enough for the left because they don't want you to reject someone because you thought for yourself and decided to reject them. They want you to reject somebody because they told you to.
Yeah.
You have to obey. That's the point.
I get that it's like a lot of people, it seems like a lot of people repeating what they've been told when you talk about the left. And I see that in religion sometimes. People be like, I read it, I was told this is real, so this is real. And that's different than when you really believe something, because then you can debate it to anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. To think it through. To be somebody on the left, you can almost get there by osmosis these days because the culture is telling you all of these things. If you're going to be, center right, you really have to think things through.
That's what's really fascinating. For the longest time when all media was controlled, when there were only a few broadcast towers to consume from, there was very little right-wing conversation happening. The establishment just controlled it all, and it was fairly moderate, left-leaning, and slowly drifting left. With the rise of the internet, all of a sudden you ended up with right-wing spaces, areas where individuals could now start speaking and communicate and maintain their value systems. And that's been an impossibility for the left. But with that internet as well, you end up with the left moving 10 times faster than they ever did, pulling further and further to the left, spiraling out of control. But aside from that, I'll just make the point about Joe Rogan. In talking about what the left believes and, what Seamus was saying, everybody, it's almost pointless to even say because so many people have made this point already that none of these people complaining about Joe even watch his show.
Right.
They don't listen to it. They have no idea why they're mad.
Right.
And that's the scary thing. And the example I like to use is this guy I know posted a meme, a tweet in reference to Joe Rogan. And a guy said, in Germany, we have a saying, if there are 11 people at a table and one of them is a Nazi and the other 10 are talking to him, you have 11 Nazis. Mm-hmm. And that's a psychotic statement because there's so much nuance there. Is he there because did the Nazi go to a meeting to de-radicalize the 10 people, former, people trying to de-radicalize him?
Right.
But the fascinating thing there is that the point they're making about Joe is that it doesn't matter how many people he has on that support the narrative. If he brings on one who doesn't, it's all bad and it must be, just removed or banned. In Germany, the story I like to bring up is when there was a journalist and Luke Rudkowski, who was on the show for a decent amount of time, and now he's in Florida. He was walking down the street when someone yelled randomly, Nazi Schweinhund, and pointed at him and this other journalist. So other random people who had no idea who he was started physically attacking him. Oh. Another guy we know was a journalist, and someone screamed at him randomly, Nazi Schweinhund. And so guys ran up, jumped him, and started punching him in the head and grabbed his camera from him. And it's like he's just some journalist guy. They hurt these people. Luke got beat up just randomly because someone pointed and said those words. That was all it took for these psychopaths to physically harm other people. That is a cult.
Yeah.
That is dangerous. And when they all come out and they're like, Joe Rogan must be banned, and you go, why? Because.
Right.
What did he say? I don't know.
Right.
They don't care. They just want it done.
And then I think the question is, if 11 people being at a table and one of them being a Nazi means that all 11 are Nazis, is Daryl Davis a Klansman for going to talk to people in the KKK and trying to de-radicalize them?
Do you see what happened when Daryl Davis went to our event?
No.
Are you familiar with Daryl Davis?
No.
He's a famous black jazz musician who one day he said to himself, I don't understand how someone could hate me if they don't even know me. So he went and actually met with white supremacists and Klansmen.
Wow.
He went to Klan rallies and he actually talked to them.
Wow.
And then eventually these Klan guys started giving up the robes and quitting and being like, I never realized these stories weren't true, right?
Amazing.
So we had an event in the Philly suburbs called what was called Ending Violence, Racism, and Authoritarianism. And it was like a generally classically liberal event. We had a bunch of people across the political spectrum who all agreed, like, hey, these are things we don't like. Antifa showed up, threatened to burn the theater down. We were forced to move it to a smaller venue at a casino with more security. And Daryl Davis was our keynote speaker. He got a standing ovation from the crowd as he explained how the robes had been given to him. He at the after party, we still had it across from the original theater because the people who ran that venue were unwilling. They were like, we're not going to back down. And when Antifa was outside and the police were blocking it, Daryl was like, I'm going to go out and talk to these guys because, that's his view. How could they hate me?
He did it with the Klan.
And they started screaming at him Nazi and racist and white supremacist, and they would not listen to a word he said. And then he made a post on Facebook that went viral where he said, I cannot believe this. That he posted this story how he said he could walk up to a Klan meeting and they would talk to him and tell him what they believed. But these far left Antifa types just yelled at him and refused to talk at all. And he was shocked by it. So to respond to your point, yes, they very much view him as far right and Nazi and all that stuff. In fact, he's been smeared because the Klansmen give him the robes and he keeps them. And he shows everybody, look what they've given up. And they're like, aha, he's got it. That proves it.
Oh my gosh.
It's insane.
That's so insane. Yeah, that's so
but how do we live with like, when you have a massive cult like that? I mean, look, I'll make this point too. To these leftists, they insult and smear, the white Christian male. Seamus and I do not believe. There's a lot of things we don't believe. Seamus is very, very religious. I'm not. But here we are having conversations. We get along. We're good friends. How is it that we all found a way to live together, but these people are absolutists and don't accept that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at history, the thing that sticks out to me most are the Maoists, right? In the Cultural Revolution, which was, you weren't discussing anything. You weren't asking people to explain anything. They would go through in the village, and if they saw somebody that had reading glasses, they'd immediately say, well, you're an intellectual, you're a threat. They would throw them in prison based on simple things like that. If you had books, you're a threat to the state. And it's this inability to even have a conversation to try to understand the other person. And it shows it's really not about a care about people. It's about this cultic belief system they have.
I get nervous when I think about Mao's revolution, and they were targeting what they called rightists.
Yes.
They were big on weeding out the right, and I don't want to find ourselves in the same position inadvertently, weeding out the leftists, like making the other out of this idea of a leftist, because that's exactly what Mao was doing. So I don't want to divide people in that sense. I understand there is a psychosis going around right now, but
Ian, I hear you and I agree with you, but I also want to make the point that I made earlier that there's a hard line when the left, for the most part, is completely, I would say, almost is almost absolute in their belief structure. They don't listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, but they want him purged. They go around and destroy and smash up businesses and burn down buildings. And as long as, someone like you is constantly saying like, oh, well, we shouldn't demonize these people and we should figure out a way to avoid that conflict, they're going to say, thank you for conceding and giving us more power. We'll exploit you for that.
Maybe it could be punish the behavior, but not the people.
Well, and I would also say too, I mean, to Tim's point, you have this hardcore elements that does this. And then you have what used to be called fellow travelers, right? These are the guys that kind of went along and they're not as strongly committed. And maybe those are the ones you're talking about. The big question though is, and Tim, I don't know what you think about this, is, what portion of the left are hardcore left and what portion are followers? I mean, can any of them be persuaded?
I do think if we look at the polling data, I mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
We're seeing an erosion we're seeing a larger portion of Democrat-aligned individuals becoming Republican as opposed to the opposite.
Right.
That it shows the Democratic Party is eroding. I don't think the Republican Party is the solution. I do think the people that are joining the Republicans are doing it out of frustration and looking for some kind of meaningful opposition they're not going to find. But, I think that's the difference. Yeah. The people who are in the Democratic alignment are probably default liberal followers or willfully ignorant and willfully going along with it. Mm-hmm. The issue is, here's the point I was making earlier, Ian. The Chinese Communist Party is absolute. If you oppose the Chinese Communist Party, you must be stopped at all costs. In the United States, we're allowed to speak out and smack talk our leaders and our politicians. We're allowed to insult the Democratic Party to a great extent. So that goodwill that we are allowed, that freedom, is exploited by the authoritarians. They say, thank you. Now we will use that fact to fund dissent in your country and erode it. So when we're dealing with groups of people that are absolutists, and I'll give you another something to think about. These people on the left call you far right, and they're unwilling to tolerate you. They would call you an extremist or alt-right or whatever, like that, that one guy who was on Joe's show keeps doing. And you keep trying to say, well, let me extend that olive branch. Well, they're taking 2 steps back. You take 2 steps forward. They take 2 steps back again. And you're like, I'm trying, guys. I'm trying. Like, yeah, come on. Keep coming.
I know where this leads.
More
hammer
power
and
for us.
anvil. This is an old Carthaginian tactic. I'm going to be surrounded pretty soon if I keep coming towards you.
That's right.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, you just say, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to stay here. Look, for the longest time, the Republican Party has very much been like, we're going to stop and stand right here. And it hasn't worked. The gun control is the best example.
Right.
Every day, the Democrats say we want to ban more guns, and they keep doing it. The activists respond saying, Ian, no one's trying to take your guns. We're just being reasonable. And then you show up a picture of Waco and say, this has been going on for decades. But where's any Republican to be like, unban the guns?
Yeah. Right.
There's so it's just constantly being pulled in the direction of authoritarian.
Couldn't I just be
left.
like, keep offering the olive branch, and then when they all come out, they're like, ha ha, now you're surrounded. I'll be like, yeah, and explode into and then they'll all like find the love. That's kind of my goal.
No, but one option is to plant yourself like a tree and say, these are my principles. I will not move, but the olive branch is available to you anytime you come here and knock on my door. So I will not keep saying like, look, they want to ban Joe Rogan. Why don't we offer a concession and just put warning labels?
Right.
No. If you don't like it, Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and Nils Lofgren, you're free to leave. They did. I respect it. Thanks. Have a nice day.
Yeah, because here's the thing. First, it's the warning labels. They're not going to be satisfied with that. They'll move on to the next thing and the next thing. And that's invariable. Gun control is a great example of that.
Or the warning labels are proof.
Yeah.
You see, we were right.
Yeah.
They're even admitting now that it's
Right.
misinformation. Ban it.
Right, exactly.
Peter, I have somewhat of an answer to your question. It's not perfect, it's not airtight, but it's just based on my experiences when you're sort of asking how many of these people are just regular Democrats and how many of them are extremists. So again, small sample size and a biased sample size.
Okay.
But I went to an art school, and the politics were generally very left-leaning. However, every left-leaning person, and I mean really far to the left-leaning person who I spoke with one-on-one or had conversations with behind closed doors or happened to hang out with, were much more willing to entertain conversations that would have been forbidden to them when other people weren't around. And they were more likely to tell jokes that would be considered offensive or laugh at jokes that I told that would be considered offensive. They were more likely to go there with you. And I think it's no mystery, because leftism is fundamentally a collectivist philosophy, that lefties are kind of only lefties when there's more than one of them around. If you catch one of these people by themselves, they're so much more reasonable. But as soon as they get into a group, they will not entertain anything you tell them. And I've had conversations with left-leaning people where I got them to admit things and accept things that they would never acknowledge in front of a group of people ever.
I was at the Battle of Berkeley. I was at a bunch of them. I can't remember which one this one was, but it was the one where that young woman got punched in the face and that video went viral.
Yeah.
And there was this one guy who was in a video with her, and after everything was like dispersing and people were fleeing, I started talking to him. And I was asking him, about what's going on. He showed me his knife, and he's like, I got to bring my knife, man, because these people are far right. They're fascists and all that stuff. And I was like, you think the people in that park are fascists? And he was like, yeah, dude. And this is an Antifa guy by himself. And I was like, yo, see that group right there? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, yo, that's like 90% old women. And he was like, well, yeah, but they're like fascists, because like the older generation, man, they're like racist and stuff. And I was like, yeah, but come on, like you think they're going to go and like pull out guns and knives and you need a knife to stop them? Like they're old ladies. And he was like, well, it's just for protection. And then I was like, and look at that. You see that flag right there? It says come and take it. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, these people are afraid that a fascist tyrannical government will oppress them. So they don't want their guns taken from them, right? And he goes, well, I mean, I don't know. And I was like, no, like, right? They say, don't take my guns. Let me keep my guns. And he goes, yeah, they want their guns. And I was like, and they say it's because they're scared of a tyrannical government taking over. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so it sounds like they're actually anti-fascist. And he was like, well, I guess, but like they're racist and stuff. And I was like, well, it sounds like they want to be left alone from a tyrannical government, same as you. maybe if you like talk to them and figure things out. There was one leftist guy who actually showed up to the event, and he was like a hippie, and he was wearing hippie clothes, and he was like, I love free speech. And I was like, what do you think about the people here? He's like, they're all racists. And he was in the park, though, and he was like, but it's good that people are coming out and expressing their free speech, and I'm willing to talk to them and tell them they're wrong. And I was like, hey, man, yeah, right on. That's what it's all about. But these other guys, you know, when you isolate these people, that's how they get away with it. They isolate these young activists, fill their heads with lies, and then tell them, don't talk to them because they'll lie to you and they're grifters and they'll try and trick you. And then these people get scared. And, you know, the other thing is cancel culture isn't about canceling the right to a great degree. A lot of people on the right are like, the left is trying to censor us. And that's true. It's true. But one part of cancel culture you need to understand is that it's an enforcement for the cultural left on the cultural left. If you are a leftist and you speak out, we will come for you. So shut your mouth and do as you're told. It's not just the right, for the most part, they're defiant. They're like, screw you, ban me, and then they get banned. The cancel culture makes fear among the ranks of default liberals where they're like, look, I can't speak up. I'll lose my job.
So part of this, what you were talking about, Seamus, of this pack, and Tim, you seem to have the same experience. You think this fact that the more intolerant is a group, that's a function of this enforcement mechanism you're talking about? And maybe there's a little bit of virtue signaling there as well, right? You don't want to admit around your friends that you know, the other person has common sense. Is there anything more to it than that?
I don't know. I mean, so I had a friend reach out to me during the Nick Sandmann debacle, and they were very on the left, and I always knew them as a left winger, and they said, I think this is insane. The people I'm surrounded with and close to all think it's completely normal. And then there's part of me that wonders, do they? Like, you're reaching out to me because you know I'm your right-leaning friend. Maybe they're reaching out to their like right-leaning friend and saying the exact same thing.
I gotta tell you, it is absolutely mind-boggling having one-on-one conversations with like critical race theory lefty types when their brains just break. You know, and you're like, the question I always ask them is, are you a fan of, you know, Martin Luther King Jr.? Say yes. Do you agree with his dream speech that one day his 4 little children will be judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin? Like, absolutely. And then I'm like, so do you think it's right to judge people based on the color of their skin or to view them based on their race principally? And they're like, yes. And then I'm just like, doesn't that kind of contradict that statement you just... Look, well, you got to understand the nuances of what Dr. King really meant. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure he did not mean that we should be judging people. Like, he said it pretty explicitly. But that's the question I always start with, because I'll be like, you know, I tell people, like, look, you don't need to lie to me and claim you like Dr. King out of some social moral obligation. It's absolutely okay if you want to come out and tell me you think he was wrong. I'm not going to get mad at you for it. We'll have a conversation about it. But because it is socially unacceptable to oppose the teachings of Dr. King, and some of them were good and some of them were bad. I mean, he's not a perfect guy or anything like that. That these people simultaneously hold contradictory views. The modern view is that racial identitarianism among the left is a mandate, but also Dr. King is a mandate as well, but they clash.
Right.
You know, Derek Bell is not a fan of those ideologies, and that's critical race theory.
Yeah, so in a way, Malcolm X won, right? The debate between Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X in the 60s about, you know, how the black community should go forward. Critical race theory is basically Malcolm X won, that racial identity is key element to who you are as a person.
It's remarkable that we still live in a society where everyone recognizes that racial identitarianism is wrong, but the left routinely somehow advances the cause of racial identitarianism, and these left activists, more pronounced Democrat types, simultaneously hold or espouse both views at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and also certain racial identities are good, right? I mean, I don't think anybody in normal conversation would say that you know, white identity politics are good, and they're not. But there's an acceptance of black identity politics, and it seems to be contradictory to me. I mean, you can't, you know, you have to have a consistent principle here.
Identity politics, in many ways, is, I think, neutral, but it's the authoritarian application of identity politics to the, you know, it's hard to actually quantify in a lot of ways, right? The civil rights movement, identity politics, certainly it was a good thing. And there were some bad elements to it. There was violence. There were riots, of course, and you know, we don't like a lot of that. But you know, we want to point out that if there is a racial disparity, that we're like, okay, well, that's a problem. How do you solve it? Well, the answer isn't more racism.
Right.
The answer is typically class-based or education-based or something like that. But I think critical race theory, wokeism, and these ideas are just used as a cudgel by the left because they know it is socially acceptable to say Martin Luther King Jr. was correct. And to oppose that, you'll be viewed as a racist. People don't want to be a racist, so the left just decided we can use this as a cudgel to beat anyone who opposes us and to scare them. Yeah, well, now we're at the point where they're like, you're a racist, and everyone's just like, shut up. Just it's meaningless.
Right.
But as I was saying, cancel culture very much is for the left. They want to make sure anybody on the left is scared to speak out. They're scared to come on shows like this, because if they did, I'll tell you what, we've invited people on the left to come on the show, and they would some have agreed to, but then at the last minute refused to. And without saying who specifically, I might have already said this in the past, but I'll just say without saying who. I think it's because if we got one of these leftists on the show with, say, Alex Jones or Steve Bannon, they would be saying, you're right, Steve. You're right, Steve. I agree, Steve. Steve, you're also correct. And then all of a sudden people would say, aha, they agree with everything Steve Bannon said. They're right wing.
Right.
Exactly.
Even though Steve Bannon's a populist and espouses many things like tax the rich, the left already agrees with.
Right.
Yeah, well, and they eat each other, and they know that. People in their in-group will single them out and say, this person isn't ideologically pure enough. I have a clip of them sitting across from Tim Pool saying, I agree with that point. He agreed with Tim Pool on something. He needs to be purged from the movement.
It's like I pointed out in that meme. The guy says in Germany, if there's 11 people, one's a Nazi and the 10 are talking to him, you have 11 Nazis. That's why the left is scared of cancel culture and this enforcement, and that's why they don't come on these shows. It's like that. It's that meme that any sufficiently unmoderated forum will become right wing.
Right.
That's what happens on the internet.
If you have 5 people on a podcast and one of them is Tim Pool, all 5 of them are Tim Pool.
Yeah.
The way I describe it is that politics only flows in one direction. If you have an Antifa member and a Proud Boy, and they're sitting there having a conversation and drinking beers, they're both Proud Boys. There's no instance where the Proud Boys or the right is going to be like, that Proud Boy is secretly Antifa. They're going to be like, why is he talking to Antifa? And the left is going to be like, 2 Proud Boys. So it only flows in one direction. So where that ends up, honestly, it sounds like the left loses. Because they'll just excise all of their members until there's nothing left.
Well, exactly. And so one thing you said earlier, which is a white pill, and which I wholeheartedly agree with, is that the corrupt authority structure of the Chinese government is actually quite brittle. Because when you are corrupt, of course, that means that your structure has less integrity. And so ultimately, even though I'm not like out to lunch here, I'm not saying there's nothing to be done. I'm not saying there's no threat. I think there is some assurance in the fact that at the end of the day, goodness and truth do triumph. And I firmly believe that.
Well, they do. And I think if you look at history, tyrants have done really well for some time, but eventually people get fed up, right? They get fed up with it. And the concentration of power, this is the thing that I always get excited about, right? The thing that fuels my desire to investigate corruption and the way that I view the world is I just have this profound distrust of people having a lot of power.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it's necessary, right? You're fighting a war. You're fighting the Nazis in World War II. You got to have generals. You got to have political leaders that have a lot of power in order to win the battle. That sometimes happens. But in normal, peaceful time, I don't want to have people that have a lot of power over my life. And I'm particularly suspicious of people in government. Doesn't mean that corporate power isn't a huge problem, but I generally Bill Gates can't force me to do anything. He can try to persuade me to buy Windows products, and he can't compel me to do anything. The government can compel me to do stuff.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I really fear, and I think a lot of people have come there. A lot of disillusioned people on the left they were sold all these promises of what government was going to be able to do for them and help them. And of course, we want government to help people in ways that it can, but it's been so disappointing in the promises that they offered, and they've never delivered. And that's what's exciting when people start thinking independent. That's, you look at Canada, what's going on. Those truckers didn't think, hey, I want to go on a 600-mile drive to Ottawa just for the hell of it. I've never seen Ottawa before. They're animated because their governments failed them, and they're tired of it.
Must have been crazy when they were getting gas. No, for real.
That's hilarious. I'm sure
imagine
the
being a
price
truck
went
stop.
up in Canada just from all the truckers driving.
Well, eventually they all got to pull in, and they're all fueling up, and
Yeah.
maybe some of them get in line in intervals and stuff, but probably,
Yeah.
No, I think I would, piggybacking off of what you're saying and how there are some people who really do believe that the government is there to take care of them, and sort of contrasting that to either a very cynical attitude or maybe even an optimistic attitude like the one that we share when it comes to truth and goodness. The naive person looks at a corrupt system and says, it's not going to affect me, it's not going to hurt me. The cynical person says, it's going to hurt me and there's nothing I can do about it, and it's going to continue to hurt other people. I think the optimistic person says, this might hurt me, but in the long run, everything is going to be okay. Even if I don't end up being comfortable with my life, even if I die, ultimately truth will prevail.
You know what scares me is that idea of survival at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that people are willing to just sit back and say, let the machine do as it pleases as long as I can just make it another day.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to take risks, man.
And cynicism does, it's funny because naivete does that, but cynicism also does that because a person says, there's nothing I can do to fight this, it's going to win.
Right.
I get nervous about the idea of truth. I find it so subjective. I know we have this conversation from time to time, objective versus subjective truth.
Every
but
episode.
when you zoom out, the further you zoom out, the less things are what you thought they were. And you realize that I'm just defining the reality with this form of truth, when if I zoom out, I can redefine it. It's the same reality. Both truths are right. Which one do we adhere to? And so I don't want to get obsessed with the truth, because I think that can be weaponized.
There's a good comic where it's two guys and there's a 6 or a 9, depending on which way you're standing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both looking from different angles, pointing down, saying 6, and the other guy's saying 9.
Yeah.
They're both right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know
Because
because somebody painted a 6 or a 9 there and intended it to be recognized as
Or
a 6 or a 9.
Somebody painted a sideways symbol knowing it would be confusing and disruptive, and that
Right.
person was the Chinese Communist Party.
You got me on that
Got
one.
you. I got you, Shane.
I mean, I would say, obviously, I'm always going to argue in favor of objective truth, and it's a bigger discussion for the after show, but because I think ultimately what you're saying is, even the claim you're making about zooming out is a truth claim. You're saying the truth of it is when we zoom out, it looks like this. So you still believe in truth. But I want to ask you something here, Peter, because the thing I really wanted to pick your brain about here is, obviously you study political corruption a lot. What would you say is something that myself, Ian, Tim, Lydia, and the people in the audience probably haven't considered about corruption, or some particularly corrupt elements within the system that aren't paid enough attention to?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I think there's a lot more corruption than people realize, and it's not this sort of abstract. People kind of think that, they're guys taking, money in shoe boxes, and they're more sophisticated about that. There's the biggest corruption in Washington, the most profitable corruption in Washington, D.C. is legal corruption. It's stuff that you can actually do and get away with. And the problem is the political class gets to write their own rules, right? I mean, you've got a business, you're in business, Tim, you've got a business. We don't get to write our own rules. We have to conform with what the laws tell us, the politicians. They get to write their own rules. So that to me is, I think, the biggest concern that we all have to have is, people always say to me, well, is it illegal? And the answer a lot of times is, well, it'd be illegal if we did it, but it's not if they do it, because they got to write the rules and they wrote it that way. And the insider trading on the stock market is the classic example of this. It was legal for a long time for members of Congress to do it. And then I wrote a book called Throw Them All Out, exposed it. We did a big 60 Minutes episode. They confronted Nancy Pelosi with, all the stuff that she was doing. And then they passed a law, because people were so outraged, they passed a law called the Stock Act that was supposed to fix it. And then about 4 or 5 months later, in the House and the Senate, they had a voice vote, so nobody recorded the vote, to gut the bill. And Barack Obama, in the middle of the night, there was no Rose Garden ceremony like there was the last time, signed it. And they totally gutted it. So it's bipartisan. And what you find a lot of times is, a lot of the combat you see going on in Washington, D.C., these guys are yelling at that guy. It's a little bit like professional wrestling.
We're going to have Marjorie Taylor Greene back on the show, and she made an excellent she told us something that was shocking to a lot of people, that Democrats and Republicans just sit in a room where they're like, okay, we got a bill here in favor of Democrats, aye. Republicans, nay. Democrats get it, bang the gavel, moving on. They don't count the votes, they don't actually go through it, they don't debate it. It's just like bang, next, bang, next. But she'll be coming back.
We got to where they go. Can I hear all the yays? They're like, yeah. All the nays, yeah. The ayes have it.
So
we got to do this.
We got to go to
Can I
Super
ask
Chats.
can I ask
We
one
got to
more
go to
quick
Super
question?
Chats.
Okay.
We are way late.
All right.
If you haven't already, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel. For every like we get, it is one honk in support of the Trucker Convoy. One like, one honk. And go to timcast.com. We're going to have a members-only podcast up around 11 or so p.m. You're not going to want to miss it. This is where we're not so family-friendly. And definitely check that out at timcast.com. I can't read the name of the first Super Chat because that's how YouTube works. They say, the great honkening knows no borders, not between nations and not between real life and the internet. And then there's a whole bunch of truck emojis and some horns. Yeah.
I love how so many of the chats are just honk,
Honk. Yeah. Everyone's just chatting honk. Everybody chant honk. Show us, Neil Williams says, show us your hunkers. All right. It's fun watching these videos, man. You know, people are like looking out their window and you hear just honking and wailing. And I'm like, dude, I dig it, man. Dark World noted at the beginning of the show, 1.7K to 4.6K likes in 60 seconds. Because I posted 1 like equals 1 hunk. Everybody said
hilarious.
All right, let's see. Rilo says, Tim, can you please clarify? When normal people cede ground to authoritarians, we are cowards, but when Rogan does it, it's tact. P.S. The freedom convoys must outlast government, else it will fail. Certain circumstances are ceding ground, and certain circumstances are tact, and certain circumstances are literally both. Joe Rogan is quite literally being tactful and ceding ground. I think there's reason to criticize, but there's also a conversation to be had about Spotify's shares recovered after he made the announcement. He gives some ground to the left. If we keep doing this, so this is literally what I said in the segment. If the right, if there are 100 grains of sand on the right and 100 grains of sand on the left, and we keep saying, well, to avoid losing 10 grains of sand, the right will give up but 1. It's tactful, it's strategy, it's a strategic loss. But if that is the only path forward after 10 years, the right has no grains of sand left. It's 1 tiny grain of sand. We don't think it's that big of a deal. My point is that it may be beneficial in the long run to retreat, because retreat in battle is sometimes the right move, but you can't only retreat. So it can be both. It really, really can. I mentioned this on this show too. And I've said not everybody can just up and leave their job. I totally understand that. Some people probably should, and some people might have to recognize that life will be very difficult and to do what they can. But I recognize not everybody could. And I recognize that we're under constraints as well, which is why we created a speakeasy, as it were, where we talk about what we can on this show, which is most things. That 1% we can't, we have over at timcast.com, and we're starting to put up on podcast platforms where we don't. So actually putting up we put up 1 uncensored show on Sundays now on iTunes, because we want to get those conversations out and bypass the censorship. I'm sorry, man. It's not easy. It's not perfect, and I'm certainly not perfect, but I try. All right. Siggy says, I am a lady truck driver in Alabama. We stand with our northern brethren. Thanks for all those who show appreciation for drivers. We get a lot of ish. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, man. All right. Jay Benning says, I was at the Vancouver support protest this weekend. I was pessimistic, thinking it was just a small group of us against the mandates. Driving through it gave me hope.
Warms your heart.
Yeah, man. So there's all these people online, these lefty liberal types are complaining. They're like, it's so noisy and they're harassing me. It's like, in 2012, there was something called the Casseroles protest, where people all across Canada were going outside banging pots and pans. And it was super noisy and loud. And they were like, yay. And I'm like, I'm down for either of it. It's nonviolent civil disobedience, man. Do your thing.
Also, to quote AOC, when people were burning buildings down, protests are supposed to make you a little uncomfortable.
That's right. And it's honking, man. But it's funny because they're like, it's 3 days of nonstop honking. It's earplugs, man. I mean, look, when the Extinction Rebellion people blocked the road in D.C., I defended it. I said, hey, look, it's nonviolent civil disobedience. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. So people need to have that medium between destruction and obstruction. And if a handful of people are like, I want to get my message out there, so they block a road, okay, the cops come in, they remove them. We say, you're going to get criminally charged for this. But we tolerate that level because we don't want people throwing firebombs.
Right.
So there's got to be some, some level. Absolutely. All right, what's this? Alex says it wasn't just Ottawa. Honkening happened in every city in Canada on Saturday, confirmed. YVR, YXX, YEG, YYC, YYZ, and YHZ with video from friends and family. Reddit city subs confirmed, whiners and all the rest. Wow, interesting.
For you Canadians.
Yeah, man, people standing up for what they believe in, great respect. Brony Ninja says, video idea for Seamus. Rich clones of 2 people run everything. The millionaire and billionaire. Bernie is complaining that they are to blame for everything until the Millies start to fawn over him because they love his book. He turns into a million, blames Billy's.
Oh my gosh, no, it's legit. It's true. That's literally exactly what happened. I have to think about that. Just have to make sure that this person doesn't sue me when I take their idea.
Yeah.
I'll have to get them to sign an NDA or something.
It's like Bernie was like, everybody, we have to break into the mansion. And then the moment he got to the door and knocked on it, they were like, Bernie, just screw those guys. Come on in the club. And he's like, I can come in? You're in the club, bro. Here's $1 million. just a minute, everybody, I have to go inside this building real quick. And then they close the door and everyone's outside.
When you write a best-selling book, you can have. It's like, well, what about
That's what he
Bernie,
said.
What about the people who like gathered the lumber and then turned it into paper? And that, like, there's so many people who worked at their jobs to make that book happen. Besides you, Bernie, why are you the millionaire? I don't
There's
get it.
that Family Guy episode where everyone's complaining about the supermarket taking jobs and destroying the town's economy or whatever. So Peter's like, let's go protest. And then he walks in the air conditioning. And then like
right.
then he walks outside and he goes, you are trespassing on private property. That's what it is. You know.
That's true.
All right. Let's see what we got. Matt B says, a Canadian, I'm proud of these guys who are in Ottawa and provincial buildings. Also, name the last protest you've seen where people were shoveling the sidewalks and trucker were removing graffiti. Yet Toronto Sun says waving Nazi and Confederate flags and stealing food from homeless people. You know what I really love about that trope? We have to feed the homeless. You hear that and I'm like, dude, they're not foodless, they're homeless.
Right.
A lot of the homeless people in the United States are very fat.
Yeah.
You know, so we need to home the homeless. That was always the funniest thing to me because I worked for nonprofits and I'm just like, yo, why are we feeding people who don't have homes? Why don't we give them homes?
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know, they're hungry. And I'm like, how do you know they're hungry? They're homeless, not foodless.
And also, technically, these truckers would be homeless, right, in Ottawa because their homes aren't there.
That's right. There you go. So they're without home temporarily.
Yeah.
All right. Clayton says, Friday, Seamus said, God's word hasn't been changed. God had rules for slavery. Wait for Seamus to respond because he'll falsely claim it was indentured servitude when there were distinctions between Jewish servants and heathen slaves. Need Matt Dillahunty on.
Yeah, so it's a good question. You have the Old Covenant and you have the New Covenant. So you have laws that were specific to the Jewish people based on God's covenant with them as opposed to the natural law of the universe. So what I was talking about basically is that there are certain immutable moral laws of the universe that do not change and cannot change based on circumstance. So something like marriage falls into that category because thou shalt not commit adultery is a commandment. So there has to be some sort of parameter for that. When it comes to the way the Old Testament discusses that, when you had wars, people would be captured as prisoners of war. Sometimes people would owe a debt, and so they would work it off. It was not the same as the kind of chattel slavery that we refer to, but nonetheless, the church condemns slavery and owning other people.
You guys need to have a special conversation on religion that we could put up on the website. I mentioned that last time, but that would be great. So if
I
you
think
guys have
it'd be
time, and we just put it for free. We'd have like a religious conversation with hippie DMT Ian and Seamus religious. Yes. All right, let's read some more. We got James.
Also, wait, can I mention one thing too though? Christianity was from its inception so anti-slavery that St. Patrick, who was taken a slave by the Irish, went back, evangelized Ireland, and within decades of his death, slavery had almost completely disappeared in Ireland because the people had accepted Christianity.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys should have a longer conversation.
Yeah.
Let's read some more. We got Jay Neighbor says, old fat truck driver from Dubuque here. Seamus, cartoon idea. Next pandemic is the lying pants on fire virus. Talking heads saying things with burning coming up from below. Then Alex Jones says something and nothing happens. Let's go Canada. All right.
Thank you. All these people are just writing my tunes for me. And they're super chatting in. I'm gonna say
They're
I will let
paying
you guys
me.
know. I know they're paying Tim. Guys, pay me. No. I do have a trucker convoy cartoon that I'm very excited to work on, and I'm very excited to show everybody. I can't wait for Thursday.
Braden Hitchener says, the guy with the Confederate flag is against the movement, most likely illiterate in history and thought the Confederate flag is incriminating to bring bad press to the entire movement. I will say there was, I forgot the guy's name. He's the Canadian hero who traveled across the country when he was sick. What was his name?
Oh, Terry something?
Terry?
Fox?
Terry Fox?
I think so. I'm not sure.
I'm not as well versed on Canadian history, but there was a statue and they put the flag on him and the mandate freedom, and everyone, people got really mad about that. And I'm very much of the, I get they didn't vandalize it. They just put a flag on him and a cape or whatever. But, my opinion is you got to be very, very careful.
Right.
About, because there are people who are sitting at home who are probably confused. As much as I don't think there are a lot of regular people that aren't politically active these days, there are some, and they're going to be like, you've got to be the people who are shoveling the snow and cleaning up graffiti and waving to people with smiles on your faces as opposed to the rambunctious,
Well, also, I want to mention this. Isn't it the purpose of a journalist to investigate a story instead of going, oh, this is something that I want to have seen happen, so I'm going to report that it did? Like, shouldn't they be asking questions about who this person with a Confederate flag is?
Yes.
Right.
You'd think.
Yeah. Yep. Or why there's one guy with a Nazi flag and then all of a sudden all the stories are like protesters were waving Nazi flags. It's like
Yeah.
there was one guy there, man. Nobody liked him.
Here's
There was a viral video of a guy who showed up at a Patriot Prayer event in, I think, near Portland, who had some kind of like, I think he had a Nazi flag or something, and he was yelling the N-word, and all the left was like, "See, this proves it," and I'm like, "Yo, it's literally a video of the right wing group kicking him out." And saying, "Get away from him." I was like, I don't understand what this. It proves they're racist, and they're like, "Yeah, well, he's with them," and I'm like, "But they're kicking him out."
Is he though?
Don't care.
If 11 people are kicking one Nazi out, you have 12 Nazis. Like,
Yeah, right.
ridiculous.
All right. Dennis says, back in July last year when churches were being burned down, Trudeau said it was a shame but understandable. Now it's unacceptable and disgusting to honk your horn for freedom. One like equals one honk.
Yes.
Honk that like button. Like that honk button.
Yeah, like hit that, smash that horn.
Yes.
That's what
Smash
the honk
that
button
horn.
is.
Yes.
Hit it. That's what the like button is.
We
That's
are
just-
change. Super chatted us and said,
Oh.
have you guys ever heard of Bill Gates?
No,
Bill Gates.
what?
Aha.
Who's that?
Started Apple.
No, but I heard of this guy named
Microsoft.
Luke, who used to be on this podcast,
Look at this.
who I miss
Hey,
dearly. Let me tell
you know what's
you.
funny?
Dude, Bill Gates.
Luke leaves the show and now he has to pay us to say things on the show.
Opportunity cost.
Our plan is complete.
Oh, this is cool. Radioactive Llama says Viva Fry was live streaming from the protest today for
Was.
hours. What he
Oh,
was
that's
showing
awesome.
didn't match with what Trudeau said at all. It is infuriating. But we have awesome content creators, commentators, and YouTubers like Viva Fry. You guys should definitely subscribe to his channel,
Yes.
who goes out and actually shows you the truth. That is the power of the internet. That's the positivity of the internet. There are bad things. There's manipulation, but that helps us break through the lies.
Tim, speaking of Luke's super chat, can we ask one question about Bill Gates and if there's any kind of connection to China? There's something you could say about the corruption with him, given your research.
Oh man, yeah. There's a big section on Bill Gates. Bill Gates loves China. He thinks President Xi works very hard for the Chinese people. He's an advisor to Xi. He's a member of this thing called the China Engineering Association.
Wow.
And it's an advisory body to the government. He's invested in a lot of companies that help build up the Chinese military. It's a huge problem. Microsoft is very involved in artificial intelligence research in China, in laboratories where the Chinese military is doing that work. And in fact, Microsoft takes interns from the People's Liberation Army. So it's a crazy relationship, and Bill Gates is one of those guys who likes the Chinese model very well.
That's crazy. I had no idea he was an advisor to Xi Jinping.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow.
I just want to.
Wow.
I want to point out how much I love the word honk.
Yes.
It's just so good. I got to read this one. Many Strange Cork says, "Give me liberty or give me honk." To honk or not to honk? That is the question. I regret I have one honk to give to my country. Let's win one for the honk.
Oh man.
I'll be your Hunkleberry. That was a good one.
That's great.
Oh my.
Honkapalooza
Oh, I
2022.
love it.
It works out so well because of the honk meme already with like
Yeah.
Clown World, and now the truckers, and now the honking.
Yeah.
I like that one. I regret I have but one honk to give my country. You don't. You can honk
Honk many
several
times.
times.
Yeah.
You can keep doing it. I had a friend once who got a ticket for improper use of horn in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
It's just because
What is that? What is that?
No honking.
Yeah, you can't honk for any reason other than like to alert someone.
Avoid collision.
New York's got
Yeah.
those too.
Okay. Oh,
Just
yeah.
because they're so highly urbanized, they don't want
Yeah.
to disturb the peace.
Yeah.
I think that's the
He
idea.
was honking to like his friend was in the house and he pulled up and honked to let him know he was there. And it's like, burp, burp.
And he got a ticket for
Yeah,
it.
and the cop was like, "You can't do that."
Oh,
It's
jeez.
like a $35 ticket or something. Improper use of horn.
of honk. They should
Just
have.
proper
Yeah.
use of horn.
See, I
You
remember.
can't tell me how to honk.
I remember as a kid, the truckers would go by on the road, and you'd
Yeah,
like,
you get them to
you'd
honk
want
you.
them to honk,
Yeah.
right? You'd want
Yeah,
them
it's
to
a
honk.
big
That's the
part
whole
of it.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jazz Monkey says, "My friends and I were serving truckers and police coffee at the protest. There was lots of love in the air, and conservative leaders are meeting and speaking with truckers in spite of the limp wristies tyrant Trudeau. Wrists.
Jordan Peterson made a call to political members of the Canadian political affiliate. I don't know how you would describe it, but hey, let's get it going. This is your moment. This is your time
Yeah.
to shine.
Mm-hmm.
The citizens are behind you. Come on.
Well, I mean, one super chat we had earlier was mentioning that the convoy was just still getting into Ottawa, and it was backed up, and more and more people are coming
I
in.
want it all through the United States, man. Bring it.
But it's very much like Occupy.
Yeah.
It's a populist protest. People in the United States, truckers should... Look, here's the crazy thing. If you're in a truck and you pull into a city and you're legally allowed to drive there, it is very obstructive to that city, but no one is doing anything that borders on any illegality, right? So the interesting thing is when you take a boat, like Extinction Rebellion did, and put it in the middle of an intersection, you're blocking traffic, move, we refuse, you're under arrest. If everybody just drove their trucks into the city and just jammed everything up, it's literally just people driving on roads.
Yeah.
There's nothing they can do other than everyone go, and you go, okay, and you just turn left and you go back around.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are they going to do? They can't do anything about it.
Well, and the other thing about truckers and the significance of this protest is they're not exactly a group of people which is generally outspoken. There are certain careers, which I will not name, that are sort of notorious for complaining about how underappreciated and undervalued they are. Truckers are extremely important, and you don't see them going out there flaunting their stuff all the time, talking about how people need to be more considerate of them, talking about how people need to appreciate them more. So when they're willing to stand up and say, we're drawing a line, all right, treat us with some decency and respect, probably listen, not just because they bring you your food, but also because this is not a group of people which is constantly making demands on us.
I hate to be a Debbie Downer on this one, but I imagine people like Klaus Schwab are going, this is very good for us. The truckers won't bring food in.
Yeah.
And then people will stop spending money and capitalism will fail.
Drones. They need our drones.
Yeah.
See, but I disagree because I think the securing of the right of the worker will be better for capitalism in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the short term, I can imagine Great Reset people are like, the truckers, if they're not working and bringing stuff in, then we're resetting everything. It's working.
Yeah.
But in the long run, if the people actually win and the corrupt system fails, then it doesn't matter what they want.
Exactly.
Well, you think about Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged. I don't know if you guys have read it or you heard about it, but yeah.
I
But
watched a 9-hour-long movie about it.
Oh my God.
Exactly. I mean, but the whole premise of the story was like all the people that make things happen in society, kind of, the smart businessmen, basically go on strike and leave.
Yep.
Like in this case, it's the truckers doing it, right? Yeah. And they're the ones that are actually delivering the food.
Yeah, they make it
that's-
happen.
that's-
People don't
yeah.
realize how important they are.
But that's like if your blood left your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what people need to realize. New York, man, these cities.
Sanguination.
I wish even for like 1 week, all the truckers were like, we're not going to go into New York City.
Yeah, that's what I want.
They would have no food.
I want people to experience what it would be like without them, without actually taking it away from them, because I don't want to cause the suffering.
Well,
I mean,
this-
it's like a
I don't know,
horrible,
look,
horrible
man,
amount of suffering I would imagine would
it's-
come out of that if
it's-
that were to happen.
There's a question about what it takes for someone to truly learn a lesson. And if these people keep voting in policies that are destroying the lives of everyone in this country because of New York, right? I'll put it this way. If the people of New York keep voting in nationally and federally the same people who then vote for policies that negatively impact people who live in the country who don't want anything to do with their way of life, there comes a time where it's like, if the truckers protested and they understood why their policies were bad, then maybe they'd be like, maybe we should stop imposing our will on people who don't live here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like it's a what was it? A Family Guy episode, I think, where a murderer pokes himself and he's in prison, and then like something happens and he takes the knife, looks at it, and he stabs himself and goes, "Oh, ow, that really hurts. Is that what I've been doing to people? Oh, I belong in here."
Funny.
It's like a point about people not realizing that they're destroying so much because they have no idea what they're doing. They don't experience it.
So somebody sent me an infographic of how long it would take for the country to completely fall apart without truckers. A very short time. It turns out. It turns out that you'd immediately run out of oxygen in hospitals. You'd run out of medicine in hospitals. You'd run out of food. You'd run out of water. You'd run out of fuel. You'd stop having trash emptied. And I tweeted, "The truckers' convoy is making me think that our media and political classes might benefit from a few weeks without these distasteful cretins doing such unimportant work as bringing food to stores, removing waste, and bringing medicine and oxygen to hospitals." I really think that our politicians and media could do with it.
Check this out. The truckers could come out right now and say, we want everyone to know that we will be doing a general trucker strike over this for the next week. No trucker will be delivering. So make sure you have adequate supplies for whatever you need. And here's what'll happen. People on the right will be like, you got it, boss. People on the left will be like, did you watch the game last night?
Yeah.
No,
And
they don't
then-
watch sports
Yeah,
either.
they don't.
Yeah, they don't. They're
no.
probably not. They'll be like, did you watch that Bernie rally last night? Or whatever it is they're watching. No, they're watching like Netflix or whatever.
Psaki speech.
Did you watch that Netflix reboot that was super progressive? I don't know. But even they don't watch that.
But
It's like-
they're not paying attention to the news. So they would be like, what's happening and why is it happening? And it's like, oh, you didn't hear? They're protesting the mandates.
They're like, well, I
And they'd
didn't
be
hear about
victims.
that because it's not a racist tweet. So like, why is
Exactly.
it? How does it affect me?
Right. And they'd be victims, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're very good at victimhood.
So they'd be like, it's not fair. It's not. Well, that's the point of the truckers telling everybody, like, hey, heads up, we're protesting for our rights.
Yeah.
But I mean, I find it really funny that the left is opposed to workers' rights right now.
Of course. But that's the thing they've always been. The left has used the worker as a human shield, basically, for any agenda they want to try to get across. They've totally co-opted the unions.
Yeah.
And then they always go out in public and claim, we're standing for the workers, we want what's best for them. But their values are nowhere even remotely close to those of the average working person. They have completely different goals.
Yeah.
I want to read a couple more super chats before we go too late. Karanath says, Ian, being an incel is not about sex. It's about not having someone to love and talk to, someone to care for and start a family with. It's not about sex, or we would just get ladies of the night. Keep it more family friendly. VR sex, VR girlfriends won't help anything for anyone.
Yeah. Also, I want to mention before Ian responds to that, when I was discussing the fact that you do have this problem with young men who feel they have no bind to society doing horrific things, I'm not saying any person that you could consider an incel is going to be a violent or bad person.
And I should point out, Seamus is the one that brought up incels earlier, not me.
Thanks for throwing me under the bus.
Yeah, it was that dirty.
He threw me right under that trucker convoy there.
I think you make a stellar point that that being celibate or involved, it's more about sex. You know, you could easily hire somebody if you wanted to have sex with them. But it's way more than I agree with you.
We should make an opening graphic that says HonkCast
Yes.
for the
HonkCast
trucker protests.
Yes.
HonkCast
Stand in
IRL.
solidarity. I'll make
Yeah.
it Freedom Tunes honky tunes.
I don't know about that one.
That's what it's going to be. Is that why they're calling it a racist protest?
Maybe.
Calling
Yeah.
us honkies with their horns?
All right, everybody, if you haven't already, smash that like button. 1 like equals 1 honk.
Woo.
So give this podcast a good honk and go to timcast.com, become a member. We're going to have a members-only podcast coming up for you around 11 or so p.m. Uncensored conversations and not very family-friendly. You can follow the show at Timcast IRL. Follow us on Instagram for clips, and you like them and share them and all that stuff. You can follow me at Timcast basically everywhere, Twitter, Getter, Gab, Instagram. Peter, you want to shout anything out?
No, just China's a major problem for us, and I think we've had a great conversation tonight. And
You do have a book.
I do. I have a book that is been out for 2 weeks. It's called Red Handed. It's actually been out for a week. Getting a lot of interest, getting a lot of criticism and attacks. Been on #1 on Amazon all week, and loved people to check it out.
That's a clever name for a book.
Thank you, thank you. I actually came up with that myself,
Very
believe it or
cool.
not. So yeah.
Do you have a social media or anything like that?
You can go to thedrilldown.com. I've got a podcast I do once a week. It's about 25 minutes looking at corruption. And you can also just find my organization, the Government Accountability Institute, online. We do a lot of research on all kinds of cronyism and corruption. It's a target-rich environment.
Right on.
Awesome. Seamus Coughlin, thank you so much for stopping by and watching this. I love getting an opportunity to do the show. Firstly, I want to plug the after show because I think we're going to have a really good conversation where we go deeper into some of this corruption. And I want to plug my YouTube channel, Freedom Tunes. Go check that out. We're going to be releasing a cartoon this week, as we release every week. It's going to be about the trucker protest. So
Can we
keep your
get-
eyes peeled for that on Thursday.
Can we get Fauci in that trucker protest so I can get some royalties?
Oh my gosh, it's true. So Tim voices this little character I invented named Dr. Fauci.
Yes.
And
I need those royalty checks.
and the
Seamus.
royalty checks from Freedom Tunes basically fund
Fund
all
this
of
whole
this.
operation.
Yeah.
You should, at the end of the cartoon, it goes to the front of the line, to the front of the convoy, and it's Fauci. And he's just trying to get home, you know? But he doesn't realize what he's done.
He's in the back.
That's so
he's in the back
funny.
honking.
Oh my gosh.
Bye.
Get out of my way. And they're like, yeah, you support us.
Hey, and follow me at IanCrossland.net. Check out my social medias there. Peter, really awesome conversation, dude. This is great.
It's a lot of fun.
Catch you guys later, man.
Yeah, I was happy to hear that Peter has a podcast. Somebody in the chat was saying if you don't have one, you should. So thedrilldown.com. That's correct.
Yep, that's
Perfect.
right.
Awesome.
Thank
and
you.
Freedom Tunes is TOONS.
Thank you, Lids.
It is cartoons, not music. You guys may follow me on Twitter, and mine's at Sarah Patch Lids.
We will see you all over at timcast.com. Sign up, become a member, and we'll see you all there. Thanks for hanging out.